Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, so here's the deal. There were some interesting things that have happened in the last 24, 48 hours. Um, and I was honestly, one, I didn't think that the Republicans had the balls to do anything. Two, I didn't know if I had the time commitment to cover the entire impeachment hearing. Um, I've resolved both of those issues, and I do, and I will. Um, So now I have to play catch up. And also, the Republicans did have the balls, and they did. So we're going to talk about the Bidens today and kind of pre-show into the impeachment hearing. Um, for those who don't know, an authorization for impeachment was voted on today and did pass 221 to 212 along party lines. So there is an authorization for impeachment of Joseph Robinette Biden for whatever the hell, I forget what they said. So I had no intention of streaming tonight, but I kept going back and forth, as you saw by my community messages and whiffly waffly. So, but before that, we have some things that we need to clear up. So we're going to go into 10 minutes about not the big guy, but Hunter, and some of the trouble he's in, and then we're going to go right into it. Tonight, I'm going to stream the resolution for the impeachment inquiry, which actually took place yesterday. And then tomorrow, during the day, and I may have to break it up because I have a prior arrangement, but we'll see. Is the floor debate on the impeachment proceedings for Joseph Robinette Biden. But that is about 9 hours. So there's a high degree of likelihood that I will probably break it up. I'll probably break it up into two. Because I have a couple things that are pressing tomorrow that I can't reschedule. But after that, my anticipation is the impeachment proceedings will take place after the holiday, since Congress is about to go on recess for the holidays. So that would be my guess. I don't know. They haven't said anything that I'm aware of definitively outside of that. So let's say hello and we'll go right into it. Hello, Digger. Hey, Alex. Good to hear, Fiery. I hope you're feeling better, buddy. Glad you're home. Hey, Dog Mama. Are you feeling better too? I think, yeah, there we go. Good. We're all getting back on board. We're all back on good feeling. Grims, what's up, buddy? AP, hello. Linda, hello. Linda wished me a good day off, and that lasted about 10 minutes. I just love doing this. I really do. It's not something that bothers me doing it. So, Muffin Rando, hello. So let's get right into it. So this is Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was subpoenaed for his crimes against this great nation. And he basically told the House GOP to go fuck themselves. Oh, wait, hang on. I have a clip for this. Why did I say it? This is what he told the House GOP.
Go fuck yourself.
And it wasn't as great as that, but that's basically what he said. So we'll watch his little presser here.
For that, I'm accountable. And for that, I'm making amends. But I'm also here today to correct how the MAGA right has portrayed me for their political purposes.
Shut up, Hunter.
I am first and foremost a son, a father, a brother, and a husband from a loving and supportive family.
You're a shitty one at all those.
I'm proud to have earned degrees from Georgetown University and Yale Law School. I'm proud of my legal career and business career. I'm proud of my time serving on a dozen different boards of directors. And I'm proud of my efforts to forge global business relationships.
All right, buddy.
For 6 years, MAGA Republicans, including members of the House committees who are in a closed-door session right now,
No one would.
have impugned my character, invaded my privacy, attacked my wife, my children, my family, and my friends. They have ridiculed my struggle with addiction. They've belittled my recovery. And they have tried to dehumanize me, all to embarrass and damage my father, who has devoted his entire public life to service.
Of China.
For 6 years, I have been the target of the unrelenting Trump attack machine, shouting, "Where's Hunter?" Well, here's my answer. I am here. Let me state as clearly as I can.
No, it's my indecisiveness.
My father was not financially involved in my business, not as a practicing lawyer, not as a board member of Burisma, not in my partnership with a Chinese private businessman, not in my investments at home nor abroad, and certainly not as an artist. During my battle with addiction, my parents were there for me. They literally saved my life. They helped me in ways that I will never be able to repay. And of course, they would never expect me to. And in the depths of my addiction, I was extremely irresponsible with my finances. But to suggest that is grounds for an impeachment inquiry is beyond the absurd. It's shameless. There is no evidence to support the allegations that my father was financially involved in my business because it did not happen. James Comer, Jim Jordan, Jason Smith, and their colleagues have distorted the facts by cherry-picking lines from a bank statement, manipulating texts I sent, editing the testimony of my friends and former business partners, and misstating personal information.
Hang on, because I have to address this real quick. An artist, what the fuck? Yes, this is a $250,000 Hunter Biden painting. I shit you not, my son can do better than that, and he's 9. I'm not even kidding. Not even remotely. He is a damn good artist, but my son, not Hunter. But that is a $250,000 painting from Hunter Biden.
That was stolen from me. There is no fairness or decency in what these Republicans are doing. They have lied over and over about every aspect of my personal and professional life. So much so that their lies have become the false facts believed by too many people. No matter how many times it is debunked, they continue to insist that my father's support of Ukraine against Russia is the result of a non-existent bribe. They displayed naked photos of me during an oversight hearing.
You took those photos.
They've taken the light of my dad's love, for me, and presented it as darkness. They have no shame. These same committee chairmen have engaged in unprecedented political interference in what would have already been a 5-year investigation of me. Yet, here I am, Mr. Chairman, taking up your offer when you said we can bring these people in for depositions or committee hearings, whichever they choose. Well, I've chosen. I am here to testify at a public hearing today to answer any of the committee's legitimate questions. Republicans do not want an open process where Americans can see their tactics, expose their baseless inquiry, or hear what I have to say. What are they afraid of? I'm here. I'm ready.
Are you ready to go across the street?
Why not testify now?
He ran like he just saw a bag of. Never mind. So, yeah. Apparently, he gets to dictate when and where Congress gets to do their job. So, like I said, we'll get quickly to the rebuttal from congressional leaders, and then we'll jump right into the impeachment.
Now, where we are hearing from Congressmen James Comer and Jim Jordan on Hunter Biden.
Issued a lawful subpoena to the president's son that we expect him to come in and be deposed. This is a normal process in an investigation. This has been a serious, credible, transparent investigation from day one. We've published 4 bank memorandums. We've had countless press conferences. This is an investigation about public corruption at the highest levels. We have accumulated mountains of evidence that's concerning to an overwhelming majority of Americans. We have specific questions in there, and I think we're going to allow you in there to see the piles and piles of documents, of bank statements, of emails, of text messages that we've worked very hard on in this committee over the last 8 or 9 months. We expect to depose the president's son, and then we will be more than happy to have a public hearing with him. With that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Jordan.
Well, I would just echo what the chairman said. You know, we're disappointed that he didn't show up. I mean, he was just across the way at the Capitol. You think he could have come here and set the questions. If you do it in an open format now, you're going to get filibusters, you're going to get speeches, you're going to get all kinds of things. What we want is the facts, and the way you get the facts in every single investigation I've been involved in is you bring people in for an interview behind closed doors where you can get those facts, and then, as the chairman said, we'd love for him to come public. Finally, I would say this, Mr. Biden's counsel and the White House have both argued that the reason he couldn't come for a deposition was because there wasn't a formal vote for an impeachment inquiry. Well, that's going to happen in a few hours. We think it's going to pass. We think the House of Representatives will go on record with a power that solely resides in the House to say we are in an official impeachment inquiry phase of our oversight. And when that happens, we'll see what their excuse is then. They should have been here today, but once we take that vote, we expect him to come in for his interview, for his deposition. And frankly, we'll also, I think, look at contempt proceedings as we move forward. With that, we'll take your question.
Why not just call?
So Hunter was there to answer questions supposedly, but they set up the deposition. Hunter Biden came to Capitol Hill and then, like I said, very unceremoniously told them,
Go fuck yourself.
and basically stood outside doing news interviews and stuff like that. So he came to gaslight and make a scene, but he wouldn't actually go for the closed door deposition. Now, here's where I don't agree. Hold it in public. Hold the whole damn thing in public. Let them look like idiots. Let the Democrats filibuster and look like idiots. Yeah, exactly. They should. We'll see if the Republicans have the balls. I won't say that. Right. That's exactly. And came all the way to DC to Capitol Hill to make that speech. Well, it's not up to the Justice Department at this point, so it'd be Sergeant in Arms through the Congress. So it would be a congressional, I do believe. So, because I know that's where the subpoenas and stuff get served, is through Sergeant in Arms through the Congress. So it would be a congressional contempt hearing, not a prosecution. So. But we'll keep going.
He's here.
I could be wrong on that. You're the lawyer.
Deposition. This could be one chance to get to hear from him. Why not just call his bluff and see if he's willing to sit?
Because there's a way you do investigations, there's a way you're not. Everyone I've been involved with, from clear back to the IRS targeting conservatives, to Benghazi, to the impeachment people, everyone, you do it in a way where they come in for private. This is what the Democrats did. Don Jr. had to testify twice in a deposition setting, 2 different committees. But somehow that doesn't apply to the Biden family. That's not how it works in our country. It's supposed to be equal treatment, the same treatment under the law.
Mr. Biden said that his father had no involvement in his business dealings, period. How do you respond?
That's not what Devin Archer said. There was telephone, phone calls, meetings, dinners, you name it. We know what happened with Burisma in Ukraine in that December 4th through December 9th timeframe. where Joe Biden goes and leverages conditions that the
He
American
was, and he
tax
defied
money on the
subpoena.
firing of the prosecutor who was looking in to the executives of the very company Hunter Biden was on the board of. We know those facts.
Remember, Joe Biden said he never met with any of these people or talked to any of these people. That was the narrative before we began this investigation. Now we know he met with and talked to every single one of them. So the president hasn't been honest
Close enough for
about
me.
his associations with these people who have been wiring millions and millions of dollars to Hunter Biden and the Biden family. Look, I think every American has a simple question. What did the Bidens do to receive the tens of millions of dollars from our enemies around the world? That's a simple question.
24 million
Jim
over
Comer,
5
do you
years.
acknowledge that you haven't answered that question and that you found no evidence of wrongdoing or criminal
We
conduct?
found some very serious evidence that
But
you look at.
Joe
No.
Biden's wrongdoing.
The checks. There's 2 checks to Joe Biden
Those
from
checks
his
were
brother. That
loan
the
repayments.
money to give Joe Biden was through influence peddling. One was through the
Those checks
American.
that you shared with
You
all
asked the question.
reporters
No.
were
Listen.
Loan repayments that we all
Where are the
saw.
loan
documents? Where are the-
We
look,
showed you the loan documents.
That is. You don't
have
understand
accused his
loan documents.
lawyers
I do. Okay. If I wrote you, if you pay me back $240,000 for a loan repayment, I should have a check
So
going to
you're
you for
accusing
$240,000.
Joe Biden's attorneys of inventing.
The law firm that represented all the shell
laundering
companies.
money.
That represented all the shell companies.
You think those lawyers have
What
laundered
do you
money?
think? You're defending them. I mean, you're acting as the
That's just a
criminal
very
defense
serious
attorney.
crime to
Are
accuse
you,
them
are
of.
you positive that money came from Joe Biden? You've read it? Are you positive?
The same bank account.
Look, we have a lot of questions. Next question.
Are you going forward with contempt?
I'll let you.
There's a process you have to follow. You have to file a report. So we will begin looking at that. Both the lawyers for the Oversight Committee, lawyers for the Judiciary Committee will move in that direction. But look, when Congress asks you to come, you're supposed to come and testify.
Devin Archer
Wait,
testified.
last thing, we also found checks from one of Hunter Biden's shell companies that were going into an account for Joe Biden.
But we showed that
They
that
said
was a
that was
loan-
a loan repayment.
that was
Oh
a
yeah,
loan
everything's a loan
repayment
repayment.
for
Well,
$1,800
the
for Ford Raptor,
Hunter
which was-
Biden will have an opportunity in deposition
But Chairman,
to
that
come in
was
and explain that.
memorialized in emails that you guys leaked from Hunter Biden's laptop.
Thank you.
I would like to have asked Hunter Biden about Mann Act violations, sex trafficking women across state
Thank you all very
lines.
much. Thank you.
That would have been a good question. You don't seem to care about that, though.
Thank you.
Oh, they didn't seem to want to answer that question.
What? God, I hate fucking media spin. So that takes us through the Hunter Biden. He was scheduled to show up. He was subpoenaed to show up. Instead, he gaslighted on the steps of Capitol Hill and told him to kick rocks and flip flops. But I mean, he's the greatest artist of our time. Just the absolute greatest artist of our time. Move over Michelangelo and fuck it. That's just stunning and brave artwork. So, like I said, this is a longer hearing as well. So I want to get right into it and not waste a ton of time. As I said, this is the hearing that happened last night for the authorization or the introduction of the bill. There was a 9.5 hour session for open debate on the floor today. And that I will do before the official impeachment proceedings begin. And then from that point forward, I will cover the entirety of the impeachment proceedings right here. So we won't miss any of that. But without going too far, let's get into this. I'm gonna try 1.25 just so we can try. It generally doesn't have much impact,
It is
but
an
we'll see.
occasion I do not relish, nor I'm sure do any of my colleagues in the room. Nonetheless, this is a weighty responsibility, one that we all take very seriously, and we must do our duty for ourselves, for the institution, and for the nation. We are here to determine a process, not an outcome. We are here to assert our Article I responsibilities, not to act as judge or jury. And we are here fundamentally to chart a path forward that unveils the facts to the public. Committees in the
Facts.
House have been engaged in investigating. As they continue to pursue transparency and accountability, we are formalizing their impeachment inquiry efforts to give the
How
House
is
the strongest
1.25?
legal
Is that good for
standing
you
to
guys?
pursue needed information and enforce subpoenas. Allowing this chamber to be at the apex of its constitutional power is vital to our system of checks and balances. I will briefly summarize the procedures today's resolution establishes for the inquiry. First, it charges the Committee on Oversight and Reform, the Committee on
Okay.
Ways and Means,
Thanks,
and the
Neil.
Committee on the Judiciary with continuing the existing inquiry. It provides procedures for conducting hearings and calling and questioning witnesses. It grants the minority equal time to question and request witnesses. It ensures investigating committees can prepare and transmit reports and documents to the Committee on the Judiciary, which traditionally considers impeachment. It gives the president and his counsel opportunities to participate in proceedings before the Committee on the Judiciary. Finally, it authorizes the Committee on the Judiciary to report to the House of Representatives resolutions, articles of impeachment, or other recommendations. If these procedures sound familiar, they should. In preparing this draft resolution, we have followed the blueprint House Democrats followed in 2019 and have drafted this resolution to closely follow House Resolution 660 from the 116th Congress. I know my friends in the minority will point out the obvious. House Republicans expressed concerns with this approach and did not support these procedures previously. How then can we support them now? The answer is, of course, that what the then majority Democrats did in 2019 is now a precedent of the House of Representatives. Having created this procedure in 2019, it's appropriate that we follow it in 2023. Before I conclude, I know today's hearing may well be a heated one. This is a difficult topic, one that sparks passions on both sides. In 2019, under the leadership of my friend, our ranking member, we were able to push through our markup with a minimum of rancor. I'm hopeful that we will again be able to do so today. Every person in this room is here because we care about this great nation of ours. Everyone is here because we believe we can make America a better place for all of our citizens. No one here, least of all myself, relishes meeting on this topic today. I know
very much, Chairman Cole. We are not here to begin a proceeding. There's been an impeachment inquiry from day one that has been going on here. And I think it's proven time and time again that the President of the United States did absolutely nothing wrong. But this is a very, very sad day for this committee and for this institution and for this country. This impeachment sham is, to put it bluntly, an extreme political stunt. It has no credibility, no legitimacy, and no integrity. It's a distraction to draw our attention.
Yeah, I
away
thought
from
only
those
I heard
Republicans
that, but
do nothing Congress that has failed to pass any meaningful laws to help the American people. And it's a shocking weaponization of the impeachment process by MAGA extremists who are dead set on doing anything and everything they can to help elect Donald Trump.
hey, HT.
You know, when I
What's
was
up,
chairman
Matt
of this
Self?
committee, Donald
Night
Trump
Rain.
was impeached twice. Both times I took it very seriously. His first impeachment was because he tried to blackmail a foreign leader into digging up dirt on then candidate Joe Biden. He wanted to stop Joe Biden from becoming president. His second impeachment, the most bipartisan in history, was because he tried to overturn the election by sending a violent mob here to the Capitol to stop us from certifying Joe Biden's victory, as the Constitution requires us to do. He wanted to stop Biden from taking office. Thankfully, he failed. But now Republicans are back at it again, trying to hurt Joe Biden, this time by abusing and weaponizing the impeachment process itself. All of this is happening because House Republican leaders refuse to abide by the election results. They're upset Trump lost. He's upset he lost. Some of them still don't even believe he lost. Many of them are upset that the insurrection didn't succeed on January 6th. And today, they want to finish the job. And what's left in the toolbox? An impeachment stunt they want to hang around Joe Biden's neck to tarnish him as he heads into the next election. They think it will muddy the waters and confuse people who know in their gut that Trump is a criminal and Joe Biden is an honest, decent man. Let me tell Republicans right now, you will fail. Because the simple truth is your whole so-called investigation is built on a lie. Republicans began this ludicrous exercise the second they took control of this House of Representatives, the very second they took control. And it's been a big, colossal waste of time ever since. It's been a pathetic joke. Not a single witness, not a shred of evidence that says Joe Biden did anything wrong. Every single Republican allegation has been debunked, and discredited, and disproven. Their own legal experts say there's not enough evidence to impeach. Their blistering bombshell key witness, he turned out to be a Chinese spy. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Their own speaker, Republican Mike Johnson, said just a few weeks ago that there's insufficient evidence to even initiate formal impeachment proceedings. Their own members, a Republican on the House Oversight Committee, was asked 2 weeks ago on Fox News, have you uncovered any wrongdoing by President Biden? She said, and I quote, the short answer is no. So Republicans have spent a year looking for dirt on Joe Biden, a year trying to make their bogus allegations stick, and at the end of it all, they have found nothing. no wrongdoing. So what is this about then? I think the answer is obvious. Republicans want to distract from their own ineffectiveness and incompetence, and they want to do everything and anything to help Donald Trump win the next election. The far-right MAGA extremists are in charge of the House of Representatives. They have neutered all the moderate Republicans and obliterated bipartisanship. And they want to cover up their own failure with this ridiculous political stunt. Donald Trump says jump. The MAGA extremists say how high. Donald Trump asked them to impeach Joe Biden, and here we are. They broke the law trying to stop Joe Biden from becoming president. They broke the law trying to violently overturn the election to prevent Joe Biden from taking office. And now they are waging this extreme political stunt by abusing and weaponizing the impeachment process. They tried to overturn the election on January 6th, and now they want to finish the job. And today, Democrats on the Rules Committee will make a simple case to the American people. First, that Joe Biden is a man of decency and integrity who respects the law, and this impeachment charade is an extreme political stunt designed to help Donald Trump win. Second, that every absurd Republican allegation against Joe Biden has been debunked. Third, that despite this fraudulent process, Republicans have received extraordinary cooperation from the White House. And fourth, that Republicans are doing this because they are focused on the wrong priorities and want to distract from their total failure to get anything done. And when this is all over, I am confident that the American people will overwhelmingly agree that this whole impeachment stunt is a national disgrace, designed to distract from their own incompetence and to help Donald Trump, a twice impeached ex-president who's been indicted more times than he's been elected. I'm confident that they will see that this is about vengeance, retaliation, and distraction. Those on the far right of the Republican Party have nothing to show for their time and power. They have never accepted that Joe Biden won. Obviously, they have contempt for the American people, and they are once again trying to overturn the election. They are willing to do anything and everything to get their way. Our democracy be damned. And my so-called moderate colleagues on the other side of the aisle are unwilling or unable to say enough is enough to those who are dead set on pursuing this extreme nonsense. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to notice, I now call up House Resolution 918.
Was he talking about
directing
his
certain
impeachment of
committees to
Trump?
continue their ongoing investigation as part of the existing House of Representatives inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach Joseph Biden, President of the United States of America, and for other purposes. Without objection, the resolution will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Is there any discussion or amendment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman is recognized. Now, the clerk will report the resolutions.
Amendment number 1 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. McGovern.
Clerk will suspend. Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
I object, Mr. Chair. I'd like to have the amendment read.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 918.
Just for the purpose of, does the gentleman seek recognition?
Yes, I would.
Okay, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. McGovern. Before the resolve clause, insert the following. Whereas President Biden began his lifetime of public service serving on the Newcastle County Council before becoming one of the youngest people ever elected to the United States Senate at age 29. Whereas President Biden honorably represented Delaware for 36 years in the Senate before being elected vice president and ultimately president, where he has rebuilt our standing on the world stage and overseen the strongest job growth in American history. And whereas Donald Trump was impeached on a bipartisan basis, has been found liable for sexual abuse and for committee fraud and lying about his net worth, has been impeached twice, and is facing a total of 91 felony charges across 4 different state and federal criminal cases. Now, therefore, be it.
Why does that have anything to do with
Mr. Chairman.
Biden's impeachment?
So the purpose of this amendment is to clarify that there is no comparison between the honesty and integrity of President Joe Biden and the dishonesty and lawlessness of Donald Trump. President Biden is a decent man, an honorable man. He follows the law and cares about upholding his oath of office. President Biden has dedicated his entire career to public service, at great personal cost to himself and to his family. President Biden has rebuilt our standing on the world stage. He has overseen the strongest job growth in American history. He has passed one of the most ambitious legislative agendas I have seen during my entire time in Congress. And my Republican colleagues know this. They know Joe Biden is a good man and that Donald Trump is a criminal. So they want to put something on the other side of the scale because they know that Trump's guilty as hell. Donald Trump tried
The
to
fucking
blackmail a foreign head of
delusion
state to
with
dig
these
up political
people
dirt on
is
Joe
just
Biden. Donald Trump
unbelievable.
tried to overturn an election because he lost to Joe Biden, sending a violent mob here to the Capitol on January 6th to try to stop the certification of the election. Donald Trump's kids stole money from a cancer charity. Donald Trump's son-in-law took $2 billion from the Saudi government in a deal so shady that it would make even Richard Nixon blush. Donald Trump has been indicted more times than he's been elected. And it's clear to me why Republicans are going after Joe Biden and trying to drag his name through the mud. They want to help normalize Donald Trump's corruption and criminality. They want to convince people that everyone does it, so it doesn't matter. Well, guess what? Everyone doesn't do it, and it does matter. There's no comparison, none whatsoever, between the decency, civility, and public service of Joe Biden and the criminality, corruption, and abuse of power of Donald Trump. Republicans launched this absurd inquiry almost a year ago, and here's what we've learned. We've learned that this investigation has received extraordinary cooperation from the Biden administration and has yielded mountains of proof that all confirms President Biden follows and respects the law. We've learned that President Biden is a good dad, that he loves his son unconditionally. We've learned that his son, Hunter, lost his mom and sister in a terrible car accident. He lost his brother to cancer. This is someone with a lot of trauma in his life and who sadly turned to drugs. And we've seen that Republicans have sought to weaponize that trauma and use it to attack President Biden and his family. Frankly, it's just disgusting. I mean, we literally had Marjorie Taylor Greene hold up explicit photos of Hunter Biden at a committee hearing. And it's unclear to me whether Republicans are so full of it that they actually believe this stuff or it's all for show. But either way, I find it to be so awful and just really offensive and quite frankly rotten. And after 10 months of digging and tens of thousands of pages of documents, all Republicans have proven is that President Biden did nothing wrong. But they don't care that they've found no evidence because for them, this is all just about weaponizing and abusing the impeachment process in order to hurt President Biden. Quote, they did it to me. That's what Trump said in an interview a few months ago. Further quote, and had they not done it to me, I think, and nobody officially said this, but I think had they not done it to me, perhaps you wouldn't have it being done to them, end quote. Now let that sink in. The whole impeachment stunt is happening because the former president demanded that MAGA extremists in Congress impeach Joe Biden. They don't care about the evidence. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about the damage this will do to our country or to this institution. Quote, either impeach the bum or fade into oblivion. That's what the former president says on social media. Either impeach the bum or fade into oblivion. So that's why we're here today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge adoption of my amendment and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Ask for roll call.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy.
This
Mr.
clerk
Roy,
is
no. Mrs.
great.
Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Thanks for the super,
Mr.
Comer.
McGovern, aye.
So if he
Ms.
gets
Scanlon.
impeached, does he
Ms.
have to
Scanlon,
sit
aye.
in
Mr.
Congress for
Dukes.
hours answering
Mr.
questions?
Dukes,
Because
aye.
that
Ms.
would be
Leger
interesting to
Fernandez.
see what
Ms.
happened,
Leger
not to
Fernandez,
mention
aye.
if
Mr.
he's
Chairman.
able.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Further-
He can
Chairman, I
choose
have an amendment
to,
like
but he
Young lady from
won't.
New Mexico is recognized.
Mr.
Uh,
Chair,
You would.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
No, me too. I'm trying to
Clerk will
hold
report
back
the
so you
amendment.
guys can hear what the fuck's going on, but
Amendment
it's
number
really
2
pissing
to
me
House
off.
Resolution 918, offered by Ms. Leger Fernandez. Before the resolve clause, insert the following. Whereas in the last impeachment proceedings against then President Donald Trump, there was extensive evidence and thousands of hours of video footage of a violent attack on the Capitol that led to the deaths of 5 law enforcement
Oh,
officers
Jesus
and
Christ.
seriously injured more than 140 more. Whereas the violent attack on the Capitol
That's not
delayed a
true.
constitutional electoral proceeding, while Trump, who incited the attack, watched it unfold for hours without intervening, according the testimony of Trump staffers before the United States House Select Committee on the January 6th attack. Whereas the evidence in the 2021 impeachment proceedings against then President Donald Trump showed that Trump sought to overturn the election and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in United States history. Whereas such evidence led to a bipartisan impeachment in the House, a bipartisan vote of 57 senators to convict Trump in the Senate, and a federal criminal indictment related to the January 6th assault in efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Whereas in the 11 months since the Republican-led committees, the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, the Committee on the Judiciary, and the Committee on Ways and Means first began their investigations, Republicans have received tens of thousands of pages of private bank records, Department of Treasury, the National Archives, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Internal Revenue Service documents, and dozens of hours of witness testimony, including Special Counsel Weiss and other high-ranking officials, at the FBI, IRS, and Department of Justice attorney assigned to Hunter Biden's case. Whereas, despite the avalanche of information House Republicans received from the Biden administration, banks, and Hunter Biden's business associates, none of the 3 Republican-led House committees pursuing a Biden impeachment has found any evidence of wrongdoing by the president, let alone an impeachable offense. Whereas Senate Republicans who conducted their own investigation in 2020 of Joe Biden's conduct as vice president also did not find any evidence of wrongdoing. Whereas the evidence, including bank records and repeated statements from witnesses gathered during the current investigation, has shown that President Biden fought corruption, was not involved in his family members' business dealings, and respected the independence of the Department of Justice. Whereas the Burisma conspiracy theory that has long been debunked, and in fact the investigation has confirmed that as vice president, Joe Biden successfully led a bipartisan and international coalition urging the Ukrainian government to address corruption. Whereas President Joe Biden chose to retain David Weiss, a United States attorney appointed by Donald Trump, as the special counsel leading the Hunter Biden investigation, and it is clear that Mr. Weiss has the full authority to investigate and prosecute Hunter Biden. Whereas, while the last Trump impeachment proceedings held public hearings, House Republicans have conducted nearly all of their investigation into President Joe Biden behind closed doors, have refused to publicly release all but 2 interview transcripts, and have repeatedly
You
misrepresented
did the
evidence,
whole
including
fucking
witnesses'
Trump
statements,
impeachment
to falsely
behind
accuse the
closed
president of
doors.
wrongdoing. Whereas, as a
In the
loving father
basement.
and a brother, Joe Biden has helped members of his family in their times of need. Whereas
The entire thing.
46,300,000 Americans aged 12 or older, or 16.5% of the United States population, had a substance use disorder in the past, and 2/3 of Americans reported they or a family member struggle with addiction. Whereas addiction significantly impacts families whose loved ones suffer from substance abuse. And whereas loving a son who has struggled with addiction and other problems is not evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors worthy of a solemn impeachment inquiry. Now for there be it.
Gentlelady is recognized to explain or address her amendment.
Mr. Chair, I offer this amendment to remind the American people that after 11 months, 3 different committees investigated and a mountain of documents and testimony, Republicans have no evidence of wrongdoing by President Joe Biden. Instead, the Republican-led investigation has proven the opposite, that this is political vengeance for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Republicans have bent over backwards to distort the truth because the twice
Great, that's your
impeached, 4
ability
times
as
indicted
Congress.
former president,
Who gives a
currently
shit?
has 91 felony
It's
charges
the same shit
pending
to
in both
Trump.
federal and state courts, wants them to. While Republicans say they need this inquiry to gather yet more evidence, they are deceiving themselves. They just don't like what the extensive evidence they've accumulated so far actually proves. President Biden and his administration voluntarily handed over tens of thousands of pages of private bank records, Treasury and
Yeah,
National
that's a
Archives
hideous jacket.
documents. Biden administration officials from the FBI, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Department of Justice, along with Department of Justice Special Counsel Attorney assigned to Hunter Biden case, have provided dozens of hours of sworn testimony.
She got
After
impeached for that
extraordinary
jacket.
transparency from the Biden administration, the evidence proves that President Biden did not engage in any wrongdoing. The evidence proves that President Biden did not profit and did not engage in James or Hunter Biden's business. Further, President Biden respected the independence of the Department of Justice and retained David Weiss, the U.S. attorney appointed by President Trump as the special counsel leading the Hunter Biden investigation. The indictments this week of Hunter Biden prove that special counsel Weiss had full independent discretion to investigate and prosecute Hunter Biden free from political interference. But remember, impeachment is about what the president does, not what his son may have done. Biden's respect for the Justice Department is in sharp contrast to Trump, who urged his Department of Justice to investigate his political opponents. President Trump's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, had to resign in protest as Trump weaponized the Department of Justice after losing the 2020 election. Biden's respect for the law, no matter the consequence for his son, is the exact opposite of Trump's declaration he will be a dictator and will purge our agencies of our civil servants if he believes they are his enemies or unfaithful. Republicans often talk about
Good.
Burisma, a
Purge
far-fetched
all of them.
conspiracy theory, but Trump's own special representative for Ukraine negotiations, Kurt Volker, found that Burisma was based on a theory that, I quote, had been debunked, end quote. And there was, I quote again, no evidence to support it, close quote. The more than 39,000 pages of documents Republicans already received and the 62,000 on the way prove that President Biden follows the rule of law as he has done his entire career. He has fought corruption at home and abroad and has upheld his most sacred oath to the Constitution, an oath he has made 10 times throughout his dedicated career of public service. In contrast, We've seen House Republicans repeatedly conceal information, hide it from the public, and selectively leak lies and innuendo that distorts the truth. While the American public waits for Congress to do its job to fund our government and lower costs, extreme MAGA Republicans want an impeachment inquiry to create more division, more chaos. This do-nothing Congress is all about chaos. It's a do-nothing but chaos Congress. The American people know what evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors looks like. We know what it feels like. Evidence of an impeachable offense looks like the January 6th insurrection, where violent mobs stormed the Capitol and threatened to hang Vice President Pence and kill Speaker Pelosi. They attacked us because
Are
Trump
they gonna
wanted to
impeach
delay
Trump again?
certification and overturn the 2020 election. That violent attack on our democracy led to the death of 5 law enforcement
No, it
officers
didn't.
and seriously injured 140 more
No,
officers.
it didn't.
When you walk out of this room, look with kindness and gratitude in your heart at the Capitol Police protecting us. They know what evidence of an impeachable offense looks like. They know what it feels like because they battled in hand-to-hand combat. That's what impeachable offense evidence looks like. Ask yourselves, what does my vote for the sham inquiry do to their sacrifice? You know, it's incredible. 197 Republicans voted against impeaching Trump for an insurrection that they witnessed and experienced firsthand as they ran for cover or barricaded themselves in their office. But now they're going to be okay with continuing an impeachment investigation into Biden when a deluge of evidence shows there's no wrongdoing. Are you kidding me? On January 6th, Trump and the insurrectionists failed to overturn the election. The evidence of that day led to a bipartisan impeachment in the House, 57 senators voting to convict in the Senate, and a historic criminal felony indictment of President Trump. What the Republicans have done by bringing this inquiry is to highlight for every American to see two visions of what leadership for the greatest democracy in history looks like. The extreme MAGA Republicans' vision is that they must do all they can to bring back to power a president who brags about becoming a dictator, a president who conspired and then organized a violent mob to disrupt one of our most sacred democratic traditions, the peaceful transfer of power, a President Trump who desperately tries to punish his political enemies without any evidence of wrongdoing. Our democratic vision, and that of President Biden, is that no person is above the law. Our vision is of an American that respects the independence of the police, the courts, and our nation's justice system. Our vision is of a Congress that fights to make our communities better rather than using our power and our precious time in this chamber for vengeance and to sow chaos. The differences could not be more
It's all
clear.
such bullshit.
Democrats
Like, it
impeached the president
couldn't be further
because
from
he
the
tried
truth.
to overturn an election and destroy our democracy. Extreme MAGA Republicans are pursuing impeachment as political revenge because a man with 91 felony charges is telling them to do so. We heard the statements and quotes that our ranking member said, but there are so many more of President Trump's vengeance and his calls for revenge. I urge my colleagues to adopt this amendment so the record is clear that the evidence has been gathered, and that evidence proves that there is no need to continue this time-consuming political theater. I yield back.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentleman from
Plus,
Texas.
I kind of wanted to make fun of her speech
note
impediment, but I
that we're
decided
here
to
talk about President Biden
not do it.
and an inquiry relative to President Biden. One of
'Cause
the
I'm bigger
whereas
than that.
clauses
I'm
here
better
in
than that.
The amendment that is offered says, whereas in the 11 months since the Republican-led committees, the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, the Committee on Judiciary, Committee on Ways and Means, first began their investigations, Republicans received tens of thousands of pages, private bank records, Department of Treasury, National Archives, Federal FBI, IRS documents, and dozens of hours witness testimony, including Special Counsel Weiss and other high-ranking officials at the FBI, IRS, and the Department of Justice, attorney assigned to Hunter Biden's case. Well, I think what's important here, and we're not here to litigate the merits of impeachment, but to simply proceed with a process for an impeachment inquiry for this body, the House of Representatives, to be able to conduct its oversight function when we have seen.
Or they
an
just want to
extraordinary amount of
grandstand and
stonework,
talk about shit.
contrary
You know
to
that.
what the ranking member said, out of this administration. Consider, for example, with respect to the IRS, Biden's Department of Justice has prevented 2 tax division officials, Mark Daley and Jack Morgan, from testifying despite subpoenas. Now, this is particularly concerning given the indictment of Hunter Biden just this past week. According to these to the IRS whistleblowers, both Morgan and Daley were involved in the decisions to not charge Hunter Biden with some of his most egregious tax crimes. IRS whistleblower Shapley said in 2021 that Daley had agreed with recommendations in the report to charge Hunter Biden for crimes in tax years 2014 to 2019. In June 2022, however, Morgan and Daley reportedly gave a presentation on why DOJ should not charge Hunter for the 2014 and 15 tax years. Well, that is particularly concerning, given the extent to which those have now been allowed to lapse with respect to the statute of limitations. Morgan and Daley also have firsthand information about David Weiss's authority to charge Hunter Biden outside of Delaware, which could potentially contradict previous statements Weiss has made. On June 29th of 2023, the committees requested transcribed interviews with 11 DOJ officials, including Morgan and Daley. DOJ declined the request and multiple further requests. On September 14th, 2023, House Judiciary Committee issued deposition subpoenas for both Daley and Morgan. However, Department of Justice stonewalled the committee once again. Daley's personal counsel said the Department of Justice directed him not to appear. On November 1st, 2023, House Judiciary Committee issued a subpoena to Morgan that required his presence at a new deposition date. However, Morgan's personal counsel informed the committee that DOJ had directed him not to appear. Now, fast forward. December 7th, Hunter Biden's indicted. DOJ states, quote, a federal grand jury returned a 9-count indictment today, charging Hunter Biden with 3 felony tax offenses and 6 misdemeanor tax offenses. According to the indictment, Hunter engaged in a 4-year scheme in which he chose not to pay at least $1.4 million in self-assessed federal taxes he owed for tax years 2016 to 2019, and to evade the assessment of taxes for tax years 2018 when he filed false returns. Okay, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want us to believe that that's some standalone problem for the president's son. But here's the problem. 4 months ago, the same David Weiss that we're talking about tried to bury the tax case against Hunter Biden. That's what happened. At that point, offering a no jail plea agreement on 2 relatively unimportant misdemeanors. Basically a deal, pretty much out of the ordinary. And the problem with that is that now suddenly Weiss has moved a different direction because the judge called it the deal out. He couldn't rationalize the plea bargain deal that he gave Hunter, and now he's making the case in the very indictment that he just put forward. The fact of the matter is there's been an extraordinary amount of stonewall. This is one example of dozens that we could get into. And this is why the inquiry matters. This is why we should proceed with the inquiry. There are other issues that we could get into and raise, but to dismiss it and to just put aside and say there's been all of these investigations and there's been no issues that have been raised is just completely contrary to what anybody with eyes reading news accounts of what has occurred and looking at the indictment that was presented last week would understand. I yield back to the chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman's recognized.
appreciate the gentleman engaging. But let's be honest, we're here because Donald Trump asked you, demanded that you be here today to bring this inquiry forward. That is why we're here. Dozens and dozens of Republicans and even Fox News hosts, let that sink in, have bluntly admitted that there's no evidence to support impeaching President
Fox
Biden.
News
and
is
instead
not
lamented
Republican.
That pursuing impeachment is not good for the country. Over the course of this year-long fishing expedition, because this is not beginning today, we've been doing this for over a year, House Republicans have poured over tens of thousands of pages of documents and financial records provided by the administration, have interviewed witnesses for dozens and dozens of hours, yet nothing they have revealed has supported their wild conspiracy theories and debunked the allegations. Nevertheless, here we are. But I think it's important to point out that this is a waste of time. I'm going to give you the words of Republicans. Don't take my word for it. Speaker Mike Johnson reportedly told his own colleagues, quote, that there is insufficient evidence to initiate formal impeachment proceedings. Rep. Mike McCall admitted, we don't have the evidence. That's his quote. Ken Buck, our colleague, the evidence for impeachment doesn't exist right now. He also said, I haven't seen any evidence linking Hunter Biden's activities to Joe Biden, and that I'm not convinced that the evidence exists. Rep. Dusty Johnson said, there's a constitutional and legal test that you have to meet with evidence when it comes to impeachment, but he has not seen that evidence. John Curtis, my bar for impeachment is incredibly high. For me, it's all about, is there an impeachable offense, and is there evidence of an impeachable offense? And when asked if he had seen anything that comes close to that bar, his answer was, quote, no. Darrell Issa, the former House Oversight chair, said the actual participation by the vice president and now president that still has to be discovered and or nailed down. Lisa McClain, when asked if the House Republicans, after nearly a year of investigation, had uncovered any improperly influenced policy decisions by President Biden, said, quote, the short answer is no. I could be here all day reading quotes from your colleagues, Republicans, who basically
have
Please,
publicly
God,
admitted
don't.
this is a waste of time after a year, after a year. So let's be honest. We are here because Donald Trump ordered you to be here. He wants to finish the job. We're not here
I
because
saw
there's
it.
any
I'll
smoke.
respond in just a minute.
We're here basically because this is what the former disgraced president wants from you. And with that, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record several pages of recent Republican quotes, basically saying this is no evidence and a waste of time.
Without objection. For any further discussion of the amendment?
Have we even discussed the amendment?
I thank the chairman. You know, the gentleman talked about stonewalling. I want to read him a quote. Quote, finally, allegations of obstruction ignore historic questions of privilege, ongoing litigation on the matter, and the fact that many executive branch witnesses testified. Democrats cannot complain about lack of participation when they created an environment that made testifying untenable. The American people will have the opportunity to decide in November 2020. We should let them, end quote. I suspect the gentleman recognizes that quote. Those are his words when he voted against impeachment of President Trump in 2019. So let's not pretend that this is not anything but the farce that it is. I understand the gentleman's position regarding President Biden, but the notion that this has any semblance of credibility or legitimacy is bellied by the facts. And while I would hope that my colleagues would apply some coherent consistency with respect to their views on impeachment, I'm not expecting that. But one thing that I certainly don't believe the American people can countenance is the notion that somehow this process is a fair one or a transparent one or an open.
It hasn't been in a long time. You tainted it. You tainted it by your bullshit hatred of Trump.
Thank you very much. And I think that in response to this, the very fact that there is an indictment.
Oh, not
President
this bitch
Biden
again.
shows that President Biden and President Biden's Department of Justice stood back. And I think it's important to actually remember that Attorney General Garland recently reiterated his basic truth about this case. And he said, I promised the Senate when I came before it for confirmation that I would leave Mr. Rice in place and that I would not interfere with his investigation. And I have kept that promise. He also testified that there had been no contact with the president or the White House about the Hunter Biden matter. So all that you are doing over there of saying something has happened with Hunter Biden and we must raise it, and we must have more and more and more documents. Oh my God, almost 100,000 pages of documents already, and you can't find a link? Because we need to remember that this is about whether or not President Biden has done anything in the last 3 years. It's not about his son's action. Just as the impeachments of President Trump were about his conduct, and they weren't about how his kids or his son-in-law profited greatly from his
You just
presidency.
talked
They weren't
about
that
fucking
$3
Jared.
billion deal. They weren't about the money that those kids stole from a cancer charity. They were
Oh
about
my
what did
God.
President Trump do in office, not about his kids. And so this actually just proves the fact. So with that, I'll yield back to my colleague.
And I would echo my colleagues' remarks and would yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
The other thing that troubles me about this is that our colleague across the aisle has said that this has to happen because there's stonewalling despite the tens of thousands of pages of evidence, the testimony by private individuals, et cetera. But he's ignoring the fact that this claim that these IRS folks have disclosed misconduct has been debunked by their own witnesses, by people from the U.S. Attorney's Office, by people from the Department of Justice, by people from the FBI, by agents from the IRS. They said these people were wrong. Yet our colleagues across the aisle cling to this misdirection and are using it to argue to their colleagues, oh, don't worry about it. This is just an inquiry. That's crap. I mean, this is.
It is just an
they have
inquiry
been given
for now.
access to the evidence. They've been given unprecedented access to the evidence. Their own witnesses, their own documents have debunked the things that they are holding out there as evidence of some fictitious misconduct. So I yield back.
And I yield back.
Any
Good night,
further,
Digger.
Comment or discussion of the amendment? Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I think we just have to level set here. We got to remember that we're here dealing with an inquiry. This has nothing to do with the former president. This has nothing to do with articles. This resolution establishes nothing more than a process to follow the evidence and assert our Article 1 authorities. By the way, Article 1 authorities and Nancy Pelosi greatly reduced. But again, any talk that is outside of the process, outside of producing witnesses, outside of compelling compliance with subpoenas, for example, is irrelevant to the discussion. We're here simply talking about moving forward with the process. With that, I yield back.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Recorded vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to it. Are there additional amendments?
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment number 3 to House Resolution 918, offered by Ms. Scanlon. Before the resolve clause, insert the following. Whereas in their investigation, the Republican majority has received 38,000 pages of financial records, including bank records for the personal accounts of members of the president's family and other private citizens, over 2,000 pages of Treasury Department reports, and tens of thousands of pages of records and emails from the National Archives from President Biden's service as vice president. Whereas Hunter Biden has offered to testify publicly under oath as part of the investigation. Whereas House committees have heard dozens of hours of testimony from Hunter Biden's business partners and then Vice President Biden's financial advisor, 3 current U.S. attorneys and Department of Justice officials, and 4 current Federal Bureau of Investigation and Internal Revenue Service supervisory special agents, and unprecedented testimony from Special Counsel David Weiss on an ongoing investigation. Whereas the FBI and Treasury Department have provided access to and briefings on highly sensitive law enforcement documents. Whereas the National Archives have produced 62,000 additional pages of then Vice President Biden's records this week, and in addition to the 20,000 pages already publicly available. And whereas at the end of June, Committee on Oversight and Accountability Chairman James Comer said in an interview, every subpoena that I have signed as chairman of the House Oversight Committee over the last 5 months, we have gotten 100% of what we requested, whether it's with the FBI or with the banks or with Treasury. Now, therefore be it.
Gentlelady is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the stated purpose of launching this inquiry is the false claim that President Biden has stonewalled this sham investigation, the purpose of this amendment is to detail the unprecedented and extensive cooperation provided by the president, his family, and this administration, despite the absence of any
Holy
constitutional
shit, they're on
basis for this
point.
sham
It's
political
bullshit,
stunt.
but
I want to
actually
remind everyone again what's really going on here.
semi on
It's
point.
as simple as this.
Oh,
House
here we go.
Republicans have wasted the past year on a cheap political stunt. The people who send us to Washington do so with the belief that we will work to make their and their families' lives better. But as we've seen all year, the extremists who have put the House majority into a chokehold aren't interested in keeping up their end of the bargain. And now they've brought us here today to waste more of the American public's time and tax dollars on petty political vengeance. In case it isn't clear already, constitutional scholars are not driving this impeachment inquiry. Instead, the former president's lackeys here in Congress are running the show, holding the floor hostage as they attempt to curry favor to obtain pardons or positions in a second Trump administration. Meanwhile, the rest of their conference seems content to sleepwalk into dictatorship as they yield what remains of their consciences to the
off.
most extreme members of the Republican Party. My amendment would shine some light on this shameful process and expose it for what it really is, a circus and a farce cooked up to placate the disgraced, defeated, and twice impeached former president. You know, there's a term for what House Republicans have proposed with their resolution today to start an impeachment inquiry. It's called a kangaroo court, a court in which the principles of law and justice are disregarded.
Don't talk about
or
Ozzy like that.
to reach a predetermined conclusion. This is my favorite definition, a mob-operated tribunal that disregards or parodies existing principles of law. That's what we're dealing with here, a MAGA kangaroo court, engaged in a desperate search for evidence to prop
He's
up
a great lawyer.
predetermined conclusion, and in which they're willing to subvert both the truth and the Constitution in a naked political stunt. For the past year, President Biden and his administration and his family members, private citizens with no role in the government, unlike the former guy, they have shared tens of thousands of documents with this kangaroo inquisition. including emails, financial records, and Treasury Department reports. They've responded to extreme Republican requests, no matter how absurd. Chairman Comer of the Oversight Committee has admitted this himself, saying, every subpoena that I have signed over the last 5 months, we've gotten 100% of what we requested. Numerous individuals, including private citizens, U.S. attorneys, Department of Justice officials, a special counsel overseeing an ongoing investigation, and federal law enforcement agents have made themselves available for dozens of hours of testimony and interviews. Federal law enforcement officials have provided briefings and access to highly sensitive documents. The president's son has offered to testify publicly under oath in front of Congress and the country, an offer that the Republicans have rejected. Extreme Republicans will continue trying to muddy the waters, attempting to drag the president and the American people down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and untruths to support their MAGA kangaroo court. But the public knows this is a sham. The fact is that Chairman Comer and the rest of the so-called investigators have seen everything. Their fundamental problem isn't a lack of evidence. They have mountains of evidence. Their problem is that none of it proves their baseless accusations, and they know it. They can't even look at us. Dozens and dozens of Republican members and even Fox News hosts have admitted on the record there's no evidence.
Stop using the
And
Fox
they
News
know it.
bullshit. They're
But
no
instead of
longer
admitting that,
conservative.
Republican leadership has yielded to the blackmail of the MAGA mob and agreed to spend our last legislative days of the year wasting more time to prop up a floundering, dead-end investigation. And in doing so, they further their attempts to chip away at the legitimacy and core values of our country's institutions. The American people deserve better than this. I encourage all of my colleagues to support my amendment to shine transparency and truth onto this extreme, illegitimate stunt. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentleman from
I'll
Pennsylvania.
yield to the ranking member. I'm sorry. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. So again, I got a level set here. We got to remember that these documents that my colleagues are talking about that were produced, these weren't just freely given documents by the good graces of the Biden administration or the Biden family, rather. Those were given to the House by whistleblowers. Whistleblowers, I might add, that had been vilified by the far left Democratic extremists. And the bank records, these bank records weren't freely given by the Biden administration. They weren't even freely given by the banks. The banks received subpoenas, and that compelled the production of the bank records. So if again, we're talking about a process here. There should be, if there's nothing to hide, why not just go through the process? Why not just have this so we can compel the production of documents, so we can compel the testimony of witnesses and force some depositions? If there's nothing to hide, there should be no issue with following the process. So again, I want to level set and just set the stage for why we need these documents. And again, what we have received has not been freely given. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate?
Just,
Ranking member.
First, I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record two different letters, one from the Trump White House and one from the Biden White House. And we hear a lot about stonewalling. I mean, the cooperation has really been unprecedented. But let me just read one excerpt from this was in response to the inquiry regarding President Trump. The White House's response to Congress was, given that your inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, any pretense of fairness, or even the most elementary due process protections, the executive branch cannot be expected to participate in it. Consistent with the duties of the President of the United States, and in particular, his obligation to preserve the rights of future occupants of his office, President Trump cannot permit his administration to participate in this partisan inquiry under any circumstances. Now, we're going to contrast that with the response that Mr. Comer and Mr. Jordan received from this White House. Again, basically saying we believe in engaging in good faith is critical to avoid constitutional
Basically,
conflict.
you wouldn't
We
read the
propose
whole
a meeting
fucking
with the
note?
staff to start this important process. Given the compressed timeline created by your waiting nearly 3 weeks to respond to our prior letter, we expect that you will put down the return date for your subpoena to allow accommodations process to proceed. Basically, it's a tale of two approaches. One administration that wants to stonewall, that was Trump, and then this administration that is cooperating.
Without objection.
But I just want to close with this. This is breaking news for everybody. So our Republican colleague, Don Bacon, just a few minutes ago, told a small group of reporters this morning that there are, quote, probably not high crimes or misdemeanors that Joe Biden has committed. Yet he still plans to vote to authorize this impeachment inquiry, notwithstanding that there's no there there. I guess the question is, when are people going to stand up and end this?
You should. It's an
This is
inquiry.
not the beginning of something. This should be the end of something. You've been doing this for over a year, and there's nothing there. There's no smoke. And so this is a colossal waste of time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate?
You're
on
a
the amendment?
waste of time.
Chair.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Just in response to the idea that this is about creating a process, I just want to reiterate what both the ranking member has said, what Representative Scanlon has laid out in detail. Our process has been ongoing. Subpoenas were issued. Subpoenas were responded to. Documents were provided. They were provided in many different ways. And that is indeed a process. There is no evidence of anything but that, as pointed out earlier, President Biden's a good father. President Biden fought corruption. President Biden was not involved in.
He's a
Joe
good
or
father.
Hunter
He
Biden's
touched his
business.
daughter in the shower,
That's
and
what the
his
documents
son
have
turned
proven.
out to be a
What this process
crackhead.
is keeping this story
Great
alive,
father.
is keeping Congress involved and distracted.
They really think the
by
American
this
people are that stupid.
impeachment idea, conspiracy thought, thought process, because it's like coming from above because there is no document. We already have a process that we followed. And the idea that this is just about a process, we need to look at Newsmax. Chairman Comer actually said, I'd indict tomorrow before they even began this process. They were talking about impeaching. They were not waiting for a
Good.
process. And Mr. Chair, I would yield to my colleague.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ledger Fernandez. And I couldn't agree more. Again, perhaps the most frustrating element of this exercise is the intellectual dishonesty to pretend that this is anything but a fait accompli. There isn't a single one of you who's going to vote against impeachment if articles are brought to the floor 4 weeks from now, 8
You're
weeks from now.
goddamn
12
right
weeks from
we
now.
aren't.
So pretending as though this is just somehow a very simple step forward to approve a perfunctory or cursory process is not level setting with the American people. It is one of the most solemn votes that any of you will take in your careers. I
Again,
suspect none
you
of you
fucked
have
it.
voted in the past to initiate an impeachment inquiry. So treating it in this
You
cursory
did this
way,
with Trump.
as the gentleman from Pennsylvania apparently wants the American people to believe, as I said, is inconsistent with the constitutional nature of impeachment, the weightiness of impeachment and proceeding on this course. And I would hope it would give some of you some pause. It's clear that that hasn't been the case. I yield back to the gentleman.
And thank you. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I would yield to my colleague from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to thank my good friend. Again, just a level set, we're here talking about a process. And it's one thing to cherry pick lines from either this White House or the last administration. At the end of the day, we're here protecting our Article 1 authority. And we're here largely because the Biden administration lawyers are saying they don't have to face the subpoenas. They don't have to compel this evidence because we haven't had this vote. So they're the ones that are saying we don't have to be here. We are trying to set this up so that we can get all the evidence and have this. But again, this is about the process and this is about absolutely. I'm sorry.
I didn't hear much about Article 1 authorities from you or any of my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee. You were there with me.
Yeah, and I yielded time that wasn't mine.
Sure.
So I apologize, my colleague. Here's the thing: that once the rules have been changed, the rules are changed. So now you can't say that what was good enough for President Trump is no longer good enough for President Biden. So the Democrats shifted the standard. Frankly, now impeachment, you could view it as almost a political exercise. We're moving forward. Anytime you have a president of a different party than the House, there's going to be calls from whatever base it is, whether it's Democratic base or Republican base, because of that. But that's not the Republican standard. That was a standard that was set by the Democrats in the last administration twice. But again, this is about our Article 1 authority. This is about making sure that we have this vote because the Biden administration is saying they don't have to produce the documents or compel witnesses to testify in depositions because we haven't had this vote. And with that, the gentlelady has been very generous with her time. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Yeah, I would just note that again on the merits, right? There's going to be a lot of back and forth about who did when in different circumstances. But on the merits, the question here isn't about production of documents. Anybody who's ever been involved with subpoenas and presentation of documents knows that document dumps are fairly normal. The question is what is actually being presented? What is being shared? The Oversight Committee has identified 82,000 pseudonym communications that could, and this is the whole point of an investigation, contain key evidence for which they've only received 14 documents. These are the questions about the pseudonym emails that have been identified, 29,000 of which are between the office of the vice
There's a
president
poll up
and the family
as we
business.
sit right here.
So for those of us
What do
who
you
are
guys think?
concerned about the flow of international dollars into the Biden family, which is hard to even dispute based on the indictment that is now sitting before us with respect to Hunter and where he's gone with his tax records, but importantly, what we know from other evidence about the extent of the millions of dollars flowing into the Biden family, Hunter and other members of the family. The question is, well, what did the vice president know when he was vice president? What did the president know? What did he know between those times? That's the point of the investigation. Again, we have 82,000 pseudonym communications 29,000 between the office of the vice president and these family businesses, and yet we only have 14 of those produced. We still have the subpoenas outstanding for Mark Daly and Jack Morgan that I alluded to before that are not being responded to. The reason is because those go to the heart of the problem. Those get to the heart of the question. So the point here, and with respect to previous quotes and so forth, the quote that the gentleman was referring to was my conclusion at the end after the inquiry is my conclusion about that point is said with respect to the articles. My point here is with respect to an inquiry. And look, again, none of us are perfect. We go through this. I just went back and reread the op-ed I wrote on December 11th, 2019, in which I concluded not to support the impeachment articles. But
It was supposed to be
notably,
not
I
impeached,
presented
but
that I did not think the
I
law was
obviously
perfect.
forgot.
I did think there were issues that merited looking into when I was sitting
To add
before
the
all that
rest.
to make sure we understood exactly what the communications were. The point is we should pursue all of the facts wherever they may lead as the body in Article 1 that is supposed to be checking Article 2. And in this instance, what we're looking at here are very important unresponded to queries by this branch, Oversight and Judiciary and others, to the administration. Again, what are we concerned about? What are we afraid about learning from Daley or Morgan? Why do we not want to make sure that Daley and Morgan come forth and testify? Why would that be concerning? Why do we not want to have those emails that are potentially pseudonym emails, as we understand it, in terms of the communications between the office of the vice president and the family businesses, when we're talking about millions of dollars flowing from international sources with all sorts of connections with people who have testified on the record, Devin Archer and others, about where the president was and the president's knowledge of the existence of these family businesses and the fact that they were selling, quote, the brand. There is significant amount of evidence that has come forward that raises questions that this body should want to know the truth about. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, I think I need a decoder ring to follow what the gentleman was just saying. I mean, look, an unprecedented amount of cooperation from this administration. National Archives has listed the number of documents that have been turned over that have been asked for. Chairman Comer said every subpoena that I have signed as chairman of the House Oversight Committee over the last 5 months, we've gotten 100% of what we requested, whether it's with the FBI or with the banks or with the Treasury. That's Chairman Comer, the guy who said that he would vote to indict Joe Biden on day one before he's seen any evidence. And I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania who's no longer with us for his honesty when he basically said that this is a political exercise. So he is absolutely correct. This is a political exercise, pure and simple. We can try to dress it up all you want, but that's what this is. And I appreciate and I want to thank him for his honesty. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Just in defense of the gentleman who's not here, what he said, I believe, is that the standard was lowered by the other side of the aisle to a political exercise. And I just want, for the record, since he's not here to defend what he said, wanted to set that straight.
Appreciate that. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
I think it's really humorous, the fever that I see from the other side to continually bring up Donald Trump. This is about Joe Biden. And to put some context to the money we're talking about, from 2014 to 2019, Biden family members and their affiliate companies received over $15 million from foreign companies and foreign nationals to Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan, Romania, and China. Biden business associates received an additional $9 million. For the president's contention that he didn't know anything about it, wasn't anywhere near Joe Biden, his son's business dealings. Devin Archer, who was a longtime Biden associate, described the Biden brand, as Chip noted, and how Hunter Biden placed Joe Biden on phone calls, including on speakerphone 20 times with business associates. And, you know, for y'all to just want to water this down and say it's nothing, what are you scared of? What are you scared of the facts? This is an inquiry that's going to go. It should have started. You're right. It should have gone far longer than this. How many happened under Nancy Pelosi? 0. We took over in January. I think Kevin put the date is September 13th or 14th to do the special inquiry. These are facts. These aren't small things. There's got to be consequences for this guy. So
Mr.
it's
Would the gentleman yield?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Oh, thank you so very much. You know, and I think that pointing out those comments from Mr. Archer is really important because we actually have the transcript, and I'll address that later. But if you actually look at that transcript, Mr. Archer is very clear that while the father may have talked to his son, they never ever talked about business. They never ever talked about financial matters. And in contrast, when we are looking at issues about family business, I would like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, I seek consent to enter into the record a Politico fact that says Trump taxes show foreign income for more than a dozen countries. And I think this,
Without objection.
I think that it is important. You are making a big deal of the fact that Joe that Joe Biden, as a private citizen, a lot of these things that you're talking about happened when Joe Biden was a private citizen, but more importantly, that his brother and his son were separate. They did not have, that their businesses were not commingled. It's very clear from the evidence that they were separate. They were not the same. In contrast, we know from this article that says Trump taxes show foreign income, Donald Trump's tax returns show the former president received income from more than a dozen countries during his time in office, highlighting a string of potential conflicts of interest. It took a lengthy legal fight to be able to get those documents, and it included money from the United Arab Emirates, from China. There was a lot of money made by Trump because President Trump kept ownership of those businesses. So I think it's really important to make the distinction that yes, Joe Biden has a brother and has a son and they have businesses, but that is not Joe Biden's business. And that is the key. Here we are looking at what did the president do as president, in contrast to what President Trump did, which was get a whole lot of money, tell a whole bunch of people, you better book your hotel stays at my properties while he was president. That is a contrast of what we're dealing with. And with that, thank you so much for yielding the time. I
Sure.
appreciate it.
Mr. Lega Fernandez, here's the difference. You've got a businessman that made his money long before he got into politics. What these facts are, what we will find out is, and try to figure out, what service did the Bidens provide? What expert was Hunter to get the 24 million and the rest of the family members? That's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. He's no businessman. He's a politician. And let's let the money trail follow and try to figure out, like his paintings, where did they come from? Where did money come from? Let's follow the trail. This is a joke. If it wasn't so serious with the money that this man apparently had, and he's from day one, didn't know anything about it, never had any involvement. He's on phone calls. How about the pseudonyms? What is that? I think in time, what y'all are trying to do is stall and prevent any information, more information from coming out. And the American people deserve better. And if he's innocent, as he says he is, let the facts show it. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly.
Gentleman is recognized.
Oh, I just want to say to the gentleman, he just read from the Republican leadership talking points that went out. I will assure him that almost everything he has said has been disproven or discredited already. We're happy to share that with him. But when he said that this is not about Donald Trump, I strongly disagree. Again, this is Donald Trump's quote: either impeach the bum or fade into oblivion. And unfortunately, my Republican colleagues are so fearful of him, are so afraid of him, that they do whatever he asks them to do. That is why we are here. We are here because of Donald Trump. We are here because the insurrection did not succeed on January 6th, and this is about finishing the job. So let's not kid ourselves that Donald Trump doesn't play a role here. I yield to the gentleman.
I would completely agree with the ranking member. USA Today, this is from last week, December 4th, USA Today. Quote, if Trump, who has been impeached twice, is the 2024 Republican nominee, Rep. Troy Nails said he wants to give Trump, quote, a little bit of ammo to fire back, end quote, and say Biden has also been impeached, end quote. So the suggestion by the gentleman from South Carolina, by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, that this has nothing to do with Donald Trump is divorced from reality. You know it, we know it, the American people know it. This is being done at the behest of former President Trump. Why? Because he remains singularly focused on exacting retribution for being impeached in a bipartisan manner for his actions on January 6th. That's it. The rest of this is theater. I yield back to Joe.
I think I yield back.
Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentlelady has requested a vote. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy.
Nazi
Mr. Langworthy, no.
fags.
Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized. Clerk will report the resolution.
Amendment number 4 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. Neguse. Page 2, line 7, strike investigative and insert the following: open and transparent investigative. Page 6, line 1, strike investigative and insert the following: open and transparent investigative. Page 9, line 19, strike investigative and insert the following: open and transparent investigative.
The gentleman's recognized on his amendment.
I thank the chairman. I hesitate to belabor the arguments I've made already regarding what I consider to be and what I think the American people would find to be a baseless impeachment process that Republicans have initiated. It's a political stunt. The American people know that to be the case. They know that because there's been no cogent articulation by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle as to what crime they're actually investigating, no connection to the constitutional standard for impeachment. But one of the other reasons they know this to be true is because of the sham process that Republicans have initiated. And this amendment seeks to at least rectify that glaring defect. And while this amendment, of course, has an audience of the entire committee, it perhaps has an even more targeted audience of one or two of my friends on the other side of the aisle who have spoken in the past about transparency. And I'm hoping maybe Mr. Massey or Mr. Roy might engage me in a colloquy about the merits of this particular amendment. It's very simple. Thus far, Republicans have engaged in a process that's been largely behind closed doors. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez recounted this in great detail. The fact that so many of the interview transcripts have been hidden from the public, the fact that witnesses who have sought to testify in public, including the president's son, have been impeded by the committee from doing so. We went back and looked. The resolution that initiated the impeachment inquiry into former President Donald Trump is very similar in terms of the language that essentially Republicans have attempted to try to emulate different provisions of it. But there was one glaring omission, which is that in that resolution in 2019, prefaced behind every component paragraph that describes the investigation that the committees of jurisdiction would be engaged in was a commitment to, quote, open and transparent investigative proceedings. 3 words, open and transparent. Those 3 words were deleted by Republicans in this resolution. And so this amendment is very simple. It's very straightforward. It's not a gotcha amendment. There's no hidden door. It's simply asking my colleagues to add that phrase, open and transparent, to the resolution as a prefatory clause before the description of each investigative committee of jurisdiction. Because thus far, the process has been anything
I hope
but.
they vote no on
And
it.
so it makes sense to me why Republicans didn't include the phrase open and transparent, because the process has not been open and transparent. So I don't think this was an accident. It wasn't an error by omission. It was intentional. There's a great way for the Republicans, my colleagues, my friends on the other side of the aisle, to perhaps prove the contrary, which is to support this amendment. With that, Mr. Chairman,
would the gentleman
I'm
yield?
happy to yield to the gentleman from Kentucky.
Words are words, but the problem is I served on the Oversight Committee when the Democrats did their inquiry, and that happened 3 floors underground in a skiff where nobody could bring their cell phones. I sat down there for hours, and what happened is there was no semblance of openness, or you would be arrested and taken to jail if you tried to witness what was happening inside of that skiff for weeks. I sat down there with Ambassador Sondland. I sat down there with Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. There was no openness, no transparency, unless you count Adam Schiff running out every time he got a nugget of something that he could leak. And that is exactly how I witnessed that process. Was the gentleman on the Oversight Committee or the Intel Committee at the time?
No, I was on Judiciary.
So if
But I guess
you've been on either
you-
of those committees,
And I understand the argument you're making. I would say a couple things. First, the resolution, again, you all used it as essentially took different provisions and modified them and so forth. The inquiry resolution was following those interviews, as I can best recollect, from back in October and September of 2019. The inquiry resolution that you all have essentially used as a template was after that. And essentially what the resolution then compelled, for example, HPSI to do was to shall hold public hearings and shall issue a report on its findings. Your resolution, and of course included that's why the open and transparent language was included. This resolution does the opposite. That's all I'm trying to figure out is why not say the Oversight Committee is going to have, quote, open and transparent proceedings. We're going to require them to hold a public hearing, and we're going to require them to issue a report. Why is the language permissive, and why is open and transparent been deleted? And this isn't a political argument. It's a good faith question.
which I answered with a question, why were we in a skiff for weeks?
What I'm saying to you is these
when
resolutions.
the Democrats were
I
investigating.
hear you. What I'm saying to you is this inquiry resolution and the inquiry resolution that was adopted at the end of October in 2019 are both taking place after 10 months, 11 months of process. You've described what you contend are closed door hearings that HPSI conducted, interviews, that they conducted. Obviously, you've heard us talk about closed door interviews that Oversight has conducted. My point is that at the impeachment inquiry phase, when we took that vote, from then on, everything was public, which is why the resolution was structured as such. In this instance, Republicans have removed it, and it's clear that they don't intend to have a public process. That's what I'm asking.
Well, I suspect at some point the other side of the aisle will claim that the information that's being publicly released has no business being in the public about bank records and things like that. So maybe it's an effort to respect the wishes of the other side.
Oh, I'm sure that that's the reason, Mr. Massey. But
I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'm going to yield to the ranking member. I'll just simply say again, I don't. This is a good faith argument. It's not complicated. Adding open and transparent to make a commitment to the American people that you're actually going to conduct a process that is open and transparent shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be difficult. And I don't know why. I get it. I understand your opposition to some of the other amendments, including amendments that I'm going to offer, but this really shouldn't be one of them. And I'll yield to the ranking member.
No, I think I may have an answer for you. I'm reading USA Today. There's an article, House Republicans, talking about how they omitted open and transparent from the resolution, and the excuse, the rationale that a Republican aide gave was that keeping open and transparent in was wordy. I mean, I really, I mean, open and transparent. I mean, 3 words, too wordy. That's the excuse to eliminate it. It's laughable. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, again, I think we all should agree that there should be open and transparent. It was in the previous resolution when we were in charge. Let's just put it in. I mean, that's a sign of good faith. But to say this being omitted because it's wordy, I mean, come on, give me a break. I yield back.
I yield back. All right, yield to the.
Give me a break.
I don't
Give
know
me a
whose time
break.
it is, but I assume it's the chairman's time, so I appreciate it. Look, again, I've got to just level set here. This amendment literally does nothing other than change the wording of the subheaders. I mean, and the ranking member just admitted that. I mean, we're here talking about changing investigative to open and transparent. Investigative. That's it. Just to put this in perspective, I have the side by side compared to the 116th and the 118th resolution.
Well,
and
Yeah,
why delete it?
Why'd you delete it?
Because we have our hearings have been in the open. They've been open and transparent.
Why
to begin with.
deliberately deleted this? Why?
And again, I was with what Mr. Massey was talking about. I was on judiciary. A lot of those meetings were, in fact, most of them were in a skiff. And as Mr. Massey said, had we come out of that skiff and reported what was being said and conducted, we would have been arrested and gone to jail. Our process here has been absolutely open. The public has been included, told, as compared to what Speaker Pelosi did, where again, we were 3 levels below ground in a skiff. So I just don't think this is necessary. But
Just for the record, gentleman does control the time, so.
Okay, thanks.
You?
You.
Yeah, I mean, again, these words were deliberately deleted. And my friends keep on saying to us, it's not about Trump, it's not about Trump, it's not about Trump, but now it's about Trump. So you can't have it both ways. But again, deliberately deleted the words open and transparent. And with all due respect, the process that you're conducting right now, I don't believe is open and transparent. And by the way, I mean, I'm not on the Oversight Committee either, but some things, especially on the first impeachment, were classified. And there was a reason for some of that. But again, all we're asking for is a gentleman to put back in the words open and transparent. For some reason, Republicans deliberately removed it. None of us can figure out why, but I support the gentleman's amendment. I yield. Thank you for yielding.
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none. Questions on the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Noes have it. Recorded vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
We'll report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. There are additional amendments.
Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 5 to House Resolution 918, offered by Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Fantastic.
Page 2, line 14, strike may and insert the following. Shall. Page 6, line 8, strike may and insert the following. Shall. Page 10, line 2, strike may and insert the following. Shall.
Gentlelady is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a follow-up to the earlier amendment about the need for open and transparency in this process. But going to Mr. Reschenthaler's thought is, how do we do that? And I think one of the ways we do that is require, not permit, but require
Change the words.
that the committees hold open hearings. It's simple. We always hold open hearings. This hearing that we are engaged in right now is open, and the American public is able to see what our arguments are, is able to determine, well, does this make sense? What should we be doing? What is the evidence? We need that because right now, in the evidence that we as Congress people have been able to see, we know that there's clear and compelling evidence in the 100,000 pages of documents and the hours of testimony that President Biden was not involved in and did not profit from his brother or his son's business dealings. So in response to Mr. Norman's concerns about where does that evidence lead, the evidence in the record actually already shows that there was no connection. It's available, though, in closed door hearings and transcripts and meetings that are not easily accessible to the public. Extreme MAGA Republicans seem to want to do their work behind closed doors and in secret. My amendment would simply require that we hold open hearings. We need open hearings because for 11 months, we've seen Republicans on these investigating committees distort the evidence they've received behind closed doors. Debunked, fact-checked, not true, distorted, mischaracterized, and misused. These are the terms that we keep seeing regarding the Republican statements about the record so far. Representatives Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene are prime examples of misrepresenting the facts they hear behind closed doors. On July 31st, Representative Boebert tweeted, I quote, Devin Archer confirmed that the big guy participated in more than 20 of Hunter's shady business deals, close quote. That same day, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene told a reporter that Devin Archer said he heard Hunter Biden speak to his father 20 times about only their business dealings. The transcript of what Archer actually said is that Archer told the committee that he did not, open quote, witness specific business deals or business dealings or specifics about any kind of financial stuff, unquote, between Hunter and his father. What did Archer say Joe Biden actually talked to his son about on these calls? Mr. Norman might be very interested in this because what Archer actually says they talked about in those 20 calls is the weather, geography, how's the fishing? They were, in Archer's terms, casual conversation. The news articles reporting these discrepancies say the transcription shows the opposite of what Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert claim. Something that is the opposite of the truth could be described as distortion or simply a lie. Una mentira, as we would say in Spanish, a lie. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record the transcript of the Archer's testimony.
Without objection.
And because it is a big document, the article titled Transcript of Devin Archer Testimony doesn't back key claims about Joe and Hunter Biden.
Without objection.
Chairman Comer, who has appeared before us and who I respect, has been leading the investigations into President Biden. Unfortunately, Chairman Comer has also misrepresented facts. Indeed, the Washington Post reported that Republican leaders exaggerate their partisan reports in the media to claim wrongdoing by President Biden. The Washington Post noted that Comer and other GOP lawmaker claims eventually lead to reporting that is, quote, untethered from the documentation in the reports, unquote, untethered. That means it's untethered from truth. It's untethered from what's actually in the reports. The Washington Post further noted that, open quote, Comer would have more credibility if he stuck to documented facts, close quote. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record the article titled How Republicans Overhyped the Findings of the Hunter Biden Probe.
Without objection.
Republicans are hiding the facts and then lying to the public about them. There have been 11 months of investigation, almost all of which has happened behind closed doors. And now they want to continue that investigation, continue those committee hearings in secret. What are they afraid of what the public's going to see? Maybe that there's no evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden and that this inquiry distracts from the important work Congress should be doing because Republicans continuously distort the facts to fit their preferred narrative. They've lost all credibility, as this newspaper article notes. Just a couple of weeks ago, Oversight Committee Republicans claimed that Hunter Biden received payments from Chinese companies and nefariously gave some to President Biden. But then we found out that hadn't happened at all. We found out that Joe Biden had helped his son make his truck payments while Hunter was struggling with addiction and in and out of rehabilitation. In 2018, before Joe Biden even ran for president, Hunter repaid his father the sum of $4,140. for a truck payment. Now, Republicans are trying to turn this $4,140 worth of help during Hunter's time of struggling with addiction into an impeachable offense. A parent's love is never without pain. The pain of watching your child struggle with addiction is something that too many Americans know intimately, something my own mother knew as she lost 2 sons to this accursed affliction, but not before she tried to help them. What parent in America would stop loving their child because that child spiraled into addiction and needed help? Americans will see in Joe Biden's truck payments some of their own actions to help their struggling children. Shame on my Republican colleagues for trying to turn this fatherly love into an impeachable offense. Shame on their attempt to politicize a parent's pain and goodness. I urge my colleagues to adopt this amendment to require public hearings, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Pennsylvania is recognized.
Okay, once again, just a level set. Here's some facts on transparency. So the Oversight Committee has already had 4 memos detailing the bank records. Of course, those have been open to the public. They've had 2 public hearings. They've also released full transcripts of those hearings to the public. They've continued to update, not just Chairman Comer, but Chairman Jordan, Chairman Smith have been on TV, they've been on print. You can't turn on a news program without seeing one of those 3 update the American people on this. So to say that we somehow lack transparency is laughable, especially when you compare it to the 116th, when even after the committee went forward with the impeachment inquiry vote, the Intel Committee continued to hold hearings in a skiff. Again, so the transparency argument is laughable in the face of the 116th and in the actions of just the Oversight Committee. With that, I yield back.
Is there additional discussion on the amendment?
Yeah,
Ranking members recognized.
we can talk about memos. I got a memo here that disproves, basically refutes everything the gentleman just said, but I have a question. When are the transcripts going to be made public and released on the interviews? Does the gentleman know?
That I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe before the end of the hearing, he could find out, because again, we talk about open and transparency. That's what we're talking about. I yield back.
The young lady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Sure, I do think it's really important that this process, if it is to go forward, is open and transparent. I've already had personal experience with this process when David Weiss, special counsel, came in, sat for 7 hours of interviews. He offered to testify in public. That offer was rejected. And then we saw members of the judiciary come out and mischaracterize what in fact he had said in that interview. Mr. Reschenthaler is absolutely right. The 3 chairs of the committees conducting this sham impeachment inquiry have been all over the news, on Fox, on Newsmax, every night, mischaracterizing what they've found, mischaracterizing what witnesses have said. And that's why it's important that if this is to go forward, the American people be able to judge for themselves. There's a pattern and practice at this point of the Republican majority hiding what's going on, only cherry picking the evidence that they want to move forward, disregarding when it's contradicted even by their own witnesses. And I think it's really important that we adopt the gentlewoman from New Mexico's amendment.
Is there further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman
Yeah,
from
Just a quick observation that our Democrat, oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
gentleman from Texas is recognized.
That our Democrat colleagues in the Judiciary Committee, on which I serve, Oversight Committee, I'm informed, are welcome to participate, do participate. Representative Goldman has participated in the proceedings. They're able to see transcripts, they're able to see the information in committees. That stuff has all been transparent and bipartisan within the committees. The timing on how that gets released, that's up to the committees in that conversation as we go through the continued investigation. That I also noticed, we're talking about people running to the press. Quick Google just shows a week before the presidential debate in 2020, Adam Schiff going on and saying, quote, "While we know that this whole smear on Joe Biden, with respect to the Hunter Biden laptop, I might add, comes from the Kremlin. Clearly, the origins of this whole smear are from the Kremlin, and the president is only too happy to have the Kremlin help and try to amplify it." That's what the American people have seen in terms of show horses going to the TV. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the chairman, and I suppose I'll pose the same question that I posed with respect to the amendment that I offered. I support Ms. Ledger Fernandez's amendment, and so for Mr. Roy or for Mr. Massey or any of my friends on the other side of the aisle who care to opine on this, all this amendment does is simply say that the committees, the 3 committees of jurisdiction that you all have decided are the committees of jurisdiction for purposes of this impeachment inquiry, Ways and Means, Oversight, and Judiciary, that they shall hold public hearings. In prior impeachment inquiry resolutions that have been approved by this Congress on a bipartisan basis, the language has always been shall. The Congress has always decided that when you conduct an impeachment inquiry, that the committees be compelled to hold public hearings, that it's not permissive. Republicans, for some reason, decided to delete that language, that the shall language has been deleted from this resolution and instead has been replaced with may, giving your chairman of those 3 committees the discretion to decide whether or not to hold a public hearing. And so I just don't, and Mr. Norman, if you cared, I mean, many of you have spoken in the past about transparency and the need for public disclosure in hearings. And I'm trying to understand why this amendment is objectionable to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I've yet to hear a cogent answer as to why that is. And I'm not asking, and Mr. Reschenthaler, if you care to, we can go back in time and you can, go give the litany of examples from 2019. It's a simple question. The 2019 impeachment resolution compelled the committees of jurisdiction to hold public hearings. This resolution doesn't, and I'm just trying to figure out why. And anybody,
Well, I think one thing when you look at the shall and the may language, you got to remember that we're not dictating what the committees are going to do. We're giving them the option to follow the evidence, have the investigation, and then determine whether or not they're going to publish a report at all. We don't think that we should micromanage these committees. As far as the openness and transparency, again, everything has been out in the open and transparent. Going back to the 116th, we have to remember that even after the inquiry vote happened, the Democrats in the committees were still holding hearings in skips where you couldn't go out of the room and talk about what was happening, let alone the American people being able to watch. We've been very transparent now in the open. And lastly, if you want to talk about the 116 and go back in time, you got to remember that this committee was given less than 24 hours notice in the 116 of moving forward on the inquiry vote. We've been telegraphing this well in advance. We've been open and transparent, not only with the information, but also with the timing. And I yield back.
So I would just say to the gentleman, again, this is fairly straightforward and pretty simple, okay? The prior resolution, use the 2019 impeachment as an example. The language is this: the chair of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence shall designate an open hearing or hearings pursuant to this section, okay? House Republicans replaced Intel Committee with Oversight, understanding that your investigation is being conducted primarily through the Oversight Committee. And you deleted the phrase shall, and instead you put the phrase may. And my point, I don't think it's very complicated. I think most Americans who are watching, by the way, Americans who may agree with you, I think they're a very, very small minority. I think most folks understand that this is a political stuff. But even insofar as, Mr. Norman, you making the case that you believe that there needs to be an investigation, and there need to be public hearings, why delete the language that requires a public hearing? Wouldn't you want a public hearing? I don't understand why you deleted it. I'm going to go to Mr. Norman, because Mr. Reschenthaler, I've given you a couple opportunities. I always enjoy our colloquies, but I'm not getting much of an answer on this one, so I don't. Maybe Mr. Norman might give me a.
Well, as far as the wordsmithing of it, may or shall, or
it's a big difference.
I get that. Here's what's going to happen: the results that's coming out of these committees. I don't dictate when the committees go in and what they do.
You do,
just like Donald Trump doesn't dictate what happens. All I know is the results will be transparent. And Ms. Gallen, I agree with you. Let's let the American people judge. And Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you bring up Hunter's drug issues. Yes, everybody has problems, or a lot of people have gone through the same things. But everybody in America has to pay tax. Everybody has to account for money that they make. Everybody should not get the deal that Hunter Biden was trying to get. And I'll comment, you mentioned that his business associate said that probably the President Biden was talking about the wind and the weather. Here's the testimony from Devin Archer in one of the hearings testified that people would be intimidated to mess with Burisma legally because of the Biden brand. During the transcribed interview with Devin Archer, he described the Biden brand as a value to a company such as Burisma. Question, you keep saying brand, but by brand, you mean the Biden family, correct? Archer, correct. Question, and that brand is what, in your opinion, was a majority of what the value that was delivered from Hunter Biden to Burisma? Answer, I didn't say majority, but I wouldn't speculate on percentages. But I do think that was an element of it. Mr. Biggs, when you say Biden family, sorry to cut you in here, I just wanted to get a clarification. You aren't talking about Dr. Jill or anybody else. You're talking about Joe Biden. Is that fair to say? Yes, that's fair to say. And that was the answer. I don't know any other clear way to show and to be transparent. This is testimony. And if you go back, Mr. Goose, I mean, all the things that have been found and will, from what I understand, will be found. You can't erase LLCs. You can't erase the pseudonyms that Congressman Roy talked about in the text and emails. You can't erase that. You can't erase the checks. He's got bank statements don't just drop out of the air and you can dispute it. So the transparency, I agree with. The fact of House being conducted and what will come out of it, I think the American people will judge. And the Biden family has gotten
Well,
by
Mr.
long enough on this.
Mr. Norman,
Let's
I would
expose it.
say,
I yield to you.
and I would say, well,
It's
I'll take back
actually the
my-
gentleman from Colorado's
Oh,
time.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But no, that's all right. Look, and I'm going to give my colleague, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, an opportunity to respond more substantively to some of your comments. But I would just simply say this: you keep on saying the American people have an opportunity to decide. They clearly will not under the process that you've designed. Just so we're clear, absolutely clear. Any Republican that votes for this resolution is voting for a process that would allow the Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee to conduct an impeachment inquiry entirely in secret. Entirely in secret. This resolution gives the chairs of those three committees the power to conduct every hearing in private. Every hearing. That's never been done before. The impeachment inquiry resolutions that we've approved, Republicans, have obviously the vast majority of Republicans opposed them, but nonetheless, the impeachment inquiries that have been adopted have said that those committees shall conduct an open hearing. Doesn't mean every hearing that they conduct has to be in public. That's not what that language requires. It simply requires that they at least conduct a public hearing. And I've yet to hear a cogent answer as to why Republicans want to give that power to their three chairmen to basically say, listen, you know what? Conduct this witch hunt behind closed doors. Do whatever you need to do. You don't need to conduct a single hearing in public for the American people to make up their own judgments. I think that's dangerous. And I don't really understand why. If you disagree with that, you could support this amendment that Ms. Ledger-Fernandez that is offered that literally is 3 words that just strikes the word may and puts shall in place of it, the same way that this has been done since time immemorial on impeachment inquiries.
You
So
yield
that's
for a
all I'm
question?
saying. I'll yield to it for a question.
As one of my colleagues mentioned, I was at the SCIF one time and Adam Schiff was conducting it. We had to basically break in. He had the doors shut. Was that open process in the SCIF?
Yeah.
And with Adam Schiff making all these accusations?
A couple things
Unfounded?
couple things I would say. So again, if you're using, let's say, the 2019 impeachment as a template or as a corollary, right? There were interviews that were conducted in classified settings and closed door. There were hearings that were conducted in public, right? We all know that. And
It might be a Hunter
I
Biden friend.
participated in numerous hearings with my colleague, Ms. Rischenthaler, and others in public. There were also interviews that were conducted behind closed doors. So I'm not making the argument that the entire process is one in which it's conducted all through open hearings. All I'm saying is that this resolution doesn't require any of the committees to hold a single public hearing. And I don't really understand why you're so resistant to saying, Chairman Comer, we're going to start this inquiry, and during this process, you have to hold at least one hearing in public. That's a reasonable thing to ask of him. I would think the American people would expect that from Congress. I'm not, again, I probably belabored this point, but it is nonsensical to me that Republicans wouldn't just say, yeah, you know what? This is a drafting error. Maybe it was a drafting error on your part, and we're going to include shall, because these committees, when considering something as weighty as impeachment, they should hold at least one of their hearings in public. But the fact that you refuse to tells me it's not a drafting error and that this was intentional. The same reason you deleted open and transparent from the resolution, that you've decided that you're going to engage in a purely political process. And I think
Gentlemen, yield.
Of course, I would yield to.
Thank you very much. Let me just make a quick point. And I don't usually like to interject myself in debate, but as my friend said, you had open and transparent in the language last time, but not everything was in the open. And I'm not, some of this was classified. I'm not making any accusations on that, but a lot of it was not in the open. In this case, particularly the Ways and Means, may well be dealing with tax returns that would not normally be public. We all know they have the authority to do that. There is some sensitivity about using those words. In the end, we decided we trust the discretion of our chairman. We think they will do open hearings at the appropriate time. But there was some pushback about using this language because there would be times when, frankly, to protect witnesses or folks that accusations might be made, they might be looking at material that you would not, none of us would want shared in the open. So that may not satisfy my friend, but I just interject that as an explanation.
Well,
as to
I
what
would
some
say-
of the concern is. And again, I do make the point, and maybe that's just a different, we trust the chairman to do the right thing. You maybe had a stronger feeling about, control from the center of it or making, we just don't operate quite that way. Again, we want these committees to operate independently. We trust the chairman to make the appropriate decision. So I'll yield back to my friend. I thank him for yielding to me.
I think the chairman, and I'll yield to Ms. Ledger-Fernandez.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I think that what we are trying to do with this amendment is not require that every single proceeding be open. And I think that's key, so that when there are requirements for privacy, as you've just described, or when there are requirements to protect national security, that can happen. But the idea that there shall be at least some public hearing, because precisely to the point that Mr. Norman is pointing out, that when you are sort of limited to reading through a transcript, you don't get what is very important, which is what about the credibility of the witness? We are going to be asked, and the American people is going to be asked to judge these witnesses on their credibility. And if we could not see them testify before Congress, if we could not see them testify before the committee, we don't know about their credibility. We all know that we get so much of our information as we see each other, as we read each other. That is who we are as human beings, which is why when you are in a courtroom, the credibility of the witness is key, and that cannot be a judge's decision about the credibility of the witness or a jury's decision about the credibility of the witness cannot be appealed, because it is the person who watches that witness testify that makes that decision. And so this amendment that I proposed allows what you're describing, Mr. Chair, which we recognize is important. It allows it. That's why we didn't say every single thing that these committees do shall be. It says they shall hold public hearings. So it is permissive to allow for the circumstances. And because we think it is so important, we do think it is not something that you leave to the discretion of the chairman, that we say as the Rules Committee, as the United States House of Representatives undergoing this most solemn, as you described at the beginning, this most solemn of obligation, that we uphold our commitment to the American public, that there shall be public hearings. And that was the intent of the resolution as it was written, precisely to accommodate your concerns. I yield back to Monica.
Sir, further discussion or debate on the amendment? The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I think the chairman, I would just echo the comments made by Ms. Ledger Fernandez. I also want to say thank you to the chairman for providing clarity, at least for me, in terms of some of the rationale behind the selection of the language, because that's really what I was trying to get at and was unable to discern why that decision was made. And what I would simply say is, I think Ms. Ledger Fernandez captured this right, that the shall language is actually permissive. I think it accomplishes what, Mr. Chairman, you and the relevant committee chairs were seeking to accomplish in terms of requiring a public hearing, but also providing the committees with the ability to conduct the necessary hearings that they believe are necessary in a closed setting. And I would just caution and perhaps beg your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, as you know, and as Mr. Reschenthaler has made the case before, that every action we take sets a precedent that then becomes a precedent for future Congresses. And walking away from this shall language, walking away from the open and transparent language. And by the way, we didn't do an amendment, but the shall language was removed from the reporting as well. So I mean, that's an important point for Mr. Norman, Mr. Roy, others, for you all to, I'm sure you gleaned this from your review of the resolution, but it's the resolution that the last impeachment inquiry resolution that was adopted by the Congress had language that requires each of these committees, after they conduct a public hearing, which is required under the prior resolutions, to issue a report, that they shall issue a report. Not the case in your resolution. It's may issue a report. So there's no requirement that any of these committees, after they conduct this impeachment inquiry that you all are very fixated on pursuing, that they issue any report. Not a requirement under the Republican resolution. I'm not sure why. I don't know if that's because you believe if the committees don't find impeachable conduct, that you don't want the committees to issue a report that the American people can review for themselves and decide. I can tell you that in prior impeachments, that's been a requirement, so that at the end of the day, the committees can follow the facts, and whether they conclude that there is in fact an impeachable offense or they conclude that there's not, they're required to issue a report by the Congress that they share with the American people. You all have chosen to make that permissive. Or, excuse me, not permissive. You've chosen to essentially make it an optional for the committees, just like public hearings are now optional for the committees, just like in an open and transparent process, it's optional for the committees. And so I would simply ask you to reconsider and perhaps give some pause to that. This language here is not a gotcha. It's just using standard language that's been used time and time before. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any additional discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Chair, I yield my time to my colleague.
Thanks for yielding me the time. I appreciate it. So to answer my friend from Colorado, look, the reason we have shall instead of may, we got to remember why there was shall language in the 116. That's because Chairman Schiff wanted to do everything behind closed doors in the SCIF. So Speaker Pelosi had to change the language from may to shall to compel him to have this out in the open. We don't, that's a historical reason why the language was shall instead of may. If you go back to the 116, we don't have that problem here because we've done everything out in the open. I just read a stat of how many hearings have been public, how many transcripts have been released. et cetera. And then as far as the shall language on issuing a report, we do not dictate a result to the committees that are investigating this. If there's nothing to report, then there's nothing to report. Frankly, you can make an argument that unlike the Mueller investigation, that airing of dirty laundry shouldn't have happened because there was a decision not to proceed. Now, I think the Democrats have changed the standard, so I like the idea that we do an inquiry and we release everything, whether or not there's a decision to actually impeach or not. Just again, I don't like that standard, but that's a standard that was set by Mueller, and it goes in the face of prosecutorial ethics and ways of conduct. But again, you change the standard, so we should be able to air the dirty laundry. But that's up to the committee chairs. We're not going to dictate to our committee chairs and predetermine an outcome. So that is why there's the difference here, and we're saying may instead of shall. With that, I yield back to the gentlewoman from Minnesota.
And lady yields back for any further discussion or debate on the amendment. Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
And the noes have it. I need to interrupt at this point to advise the committee that the Rules Committee has business on the floor. So we will be recessing and we'll return at the beginning of the last vote series after the last vote is cast on the floor and resume the hearing at that point. So with that, the committee stands in recess.
Okay, so apparently that was the first portion of it. So I didn't think there was that many amendments. So let me look real quick. No, that's the floor. I don't want the floor. Because that's legitimately all I see. Of that portion. So I'm wondering if they just rolled it into the next day. So let me just do some look real quick. Yeah, so apparently, well, here. Authorization, authorize impeachment into Biden. See, I'm wondering if they just took it to the floor after, and that's why we get such a lengthy day the next day. Because it looks like there's some skips in there. So I am going to assume that they just took it to the floor. Unless somebody has something else. Because I can't find another, which is not surprising. Not surprising. Blah, 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 blah. So that's the only committee video that I can find. So I assume that they took it to the floor. But let me... House Rules Committee. Let me see. Because I'll just check the House Rules Committee Committee on House Rules. Jesus Christ, no. Okay. Well, a bunch of it's cut off, so. There we go. Now I have the rest of it. Sorry about that. I should have just went to the source. I know better. But so this is where they pick back up, and we'll continue. So there's about an hour. So we'll go to 125 again. But yeah.
An amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 6 to House Resolution 918, offered by Ms. Scanlon. At the end of the resolution,
Fox
at
News
the end of the
asshole. Don't
resolution,
ever
the
trust
following.
them.
Section 7, limitation on subpoena authority. Notwithstanding Clause 2M of Rule 11, a chair or ranking minority member of a committee or select committee of the House of Representatives, if such chair or ranking minority member did not comply with a subpoena duly issued by the House of Representatives, a committee of the House of Representatives, or a select committee of the House of Representatives, is not authorized to issue a subpoena, 1, pursuant to this resolution, or 2, in furtherance of the impeachment inquiry described in the first section of this resolution.
The gentlelady is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you. My amendment would make clear that members of this body who have defied a congressional subpoena are not entitled to enforce a subpoena for the purposes of this inquiry. This should be common sense. Troublingly, we have Republican members of this body who have thumbed their noses at congressional subpoenas. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, one of the 3 committees directed to carry out this baseless investigation, was issued a subpoena last year by the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee to testify concerning what he knew about the planning and execution of the various attempts to overturn the 2020 election, the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and the former president's response and activities in response to that attack on the Capitol. But he willfully defied that subpoena and failed to appear for his scheduled depositions multiple times. Now, out of compliance with Congress himself, he's being asked to wield subpoena power as an act of petty political vengeance. These are not credible actors. This is not a credible investigation. It's a farce. It's a kangaroo court, all to satisfy the 4 times indicted, twice impeached, and unelected former president's ego. And as we've seen for years, our extreme Republican colleagues are more than happy to cave to Trump's demands of retribution against his political rivals in a desperate attempt to help him in the polls. So refusing to cooperate with a congressional subpoena, especially as a member of this body, a body where we've heard argument today about the duty to enforce Article 1 authority, is just another example of our extremist colleagues' disregard for the rule of law and our American institutions. So we as members of Congress shouldn't let it stand, and I would urge adoption of my amendment.
Extreme MAGA
The lady yields back.
Republicans.
Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Maggots.
Hearing none. The questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I request a vote.
Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
And the note. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see a gentleman come in. How's the gentleman from Colorado recorded?
The gentleman is not recorded. Mr. Neguse, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Under further amendments,
Is there, Chairman, I have an amendment number 7.
gentleman's recognized. Oh, excuse me. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 7 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. McGovern. Strike Section 6.
Gentleman's recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This impeachment inquiry resolution deems as passed a second resolution regarding the enforcement of subpoenas in court, including potentially dragging 2 nonpartisan career prosecutors to court when their supervisor already participated in a transcribed interview. And my amendment doesn't even stop you from doing that. All I'm saying is that rather than deeming this resolution, let's consider it separately on the floor and let the House decide. Let's just recap for those just tuning in what happened right before this committee went into recess. Democrats brought up an amendment to insert words open and transparent into the Republicans' impeachment resolution. You all voted no. Democrats brought up an amendment to require at least one public hearing on impeachment. My friends voted no. I asked when the transcripts of their behind closed doors interviews would be released. They told us they'd have to get back to us. And I think what's going on here is pretty clear. They're against transparency because this whole exercise is built on Republicans going on Fox News and mischaracterizing, let's be honest, lying about the evidence. They interview someone in private who says President Biden did nothing wrong. Then they go on Fox News and literally say the opposite. I'll give you an example. My friend from Texas, Mr. Roy, keeps harping on the need to bring in 2 career prosecutors who I'm not going to reference by name because they're getting death threats. But what he doesn't tell you is that Republicans already dragged in their boss to testify before the Judiciary Committee on October 25th. And his testimony totally undercuts and debunks all of the absurd claims that my colleague from Texas keeps making. Now, I'm told that Mr. Roy wasn't at that interview. I don't know why he didn't show up, but maybe if he showed up, he would know that his allegations have been repeatedly disproven. But that's just one example of why Republicans don't want transparency. That's why they don't want public hearings. They know that unless they do this behind closed doors, this whole extreme political stunt will evaporate because their lies will be exposed. And so they voted no on transparency and openness and no on open hearings. I think at the very least, Republicans should be more transparent and require a separate vote on a resolution authorizing our committees to go to court. And with that, I would urge a yes vote on my amendment, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from New York, recognized.
I'm not really going to address that amendment, but my Democratic colleagues have tried to argue that the committees have experienced historic levels of cooperation from the White House and from the administration. And clearly, they've been taking their talking points directly from the White House. The committees have had to use all the tools in their toolbox to get compliance, and still the White House is refusing to provide documents and witnesses in the furtherance of this investigation. Let's start with the suspicious activities reports. In the past, when Congress requested SARs, the Treasury Department provided them. But in a policy change, the Biden administration has refused. Only when the Oversight Committee noticed a hearing to discuss this obstruction did the Treasury Department provide them, but only in camera. Let's look at the bank records. Chairman Comer has had to subpoena the banks for those records. Let's talk about FBI's FD 1023 form. This was a document that the FBI created based on information provided by a trusted confidential informant. The document details a bribery scheme involving Joe and Hunter Biden. When the Oversight Committee subpoenaed this document, the FBI initially wouldn't even acknowledge that the document existed. It took to the eve of a contempt markup of FBI Director Wray to gain access to this document. Again and again, the committees have had to fight to obtain records, information, and testimony to which they are entitled. In another example, the Oversight Committee has been requesting for months all the pseudonym emails when Joe Biden was vice president. He even used his pseudonym to communicate with Hunter Biden's associates. There are at least 80,000 pages of emails that we know of. The Biden White House only produced 14 pages until the committee noticed this markup for the impeachment inquiry resolution. Even the White House has stated in writing that it does not plan to cooperate with this impeachment inquiry absent a vote. The House of Representatives needs this impeachment inquiry resolution to move forward in this investigation, to understand why President Biden continues to lie about his involvement with his family's business schemes. He has lied about knowing his son's business dealings, the source of his son's funds, about having contact with his son's business associates, benefiting from his son's businesses, his son doing anything wrong. Why does the president continue to lie? How deep was his role in his son's business schemes? And these schemes involve foreign oligarchs and CCP officials. They involve getting millions of dollars in exchange for no known good or service. They involved over 20 shell companies. We have evidence of direct payments to Joe Biden from his brother James and from Hunter. Hunter even paid Joe directly from the business account, an account that received millions from the CCP. If they were just loan repayments, where are the loan documents? The committees have asked for those loan documents. They've received nothing. And even if they were loan repayments, Joe Biden was still getting money from the CCP. Did he know it was from the CCP? These are why we need to do this investigation and this inquiry. These are the questions that still need to be answered, and why this impeachment inquiry resolution is absolutely needed. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Yeah, Mr.
Gentleman's
Chairman,
recognized.
yeah. Boy, it's just really amazing to hear some of the stuff that gets set up here. The bottom line is everything the gentleman said has been proven and debunked. I mean, there's no there. There's not even any smoke, and that's why earlier I read a list. I only read like the first 10 names of Republican members, many who are on the committees of jurisdiction, who have basically said there's no there. But be that as it may, I mean, we are here because Donald Trump wants us to be here. We are here because this is a convenient distraction for my Republican friends for the fact that they have accomplished absolutely nothing, not a thing for the American people since they took control of this House. We are here because they're trying to finish the job they couldn't get done on January 6th, and that is they want to overturn the last election. That is why we are here. It is as clear as day.
This doesn't do
And
that.
So, all these documents that the gentleman refers to that, by the way, it seems that these committees are getting, again, why can't we at least why can't we demand that the committees who get it file a report? Why can't we demand that they at least do one public hearing? Why can't we demand, any transparency or any openness? So this is, those are bad talking points. Let me just say. So whoever put them together, I think, did my friend a disservice. But again, this is not a radical amendment. It's just to me common sense. And again, I hope all my colleagues will vote yes. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you so very much. And I think that this once again proves the fact that we need, what we just heard, demonstrates that we need public hearings so that the public can listen to the witnesses. They can see how they are asked questions, what the answers are, so it's very clear. Because we have evidence from the record, because they're of these like 90,000 page documents that have been produced that show that this loan that my colleague was referred to happened back in 2017, before President Biden had even announced his run for presidency. So it has nothing to do with what the president has done while serving in office these last 3 years, which is an incredible job, the most significant legislative achievement since the New Deal, in contrast to what we've done here, which is absolutely nothing. And the records show, the bank records show that yes, there was a loan and it was repaid, and that when it was repaid, there was precisely annotation saying this is
Did
for
she
the
say
repayment
we
of
paid?
the loan period in 2017 and 2018. This
So
is
you
the
paid through
kind of
WeChat?
information that's already significantly sort of in the record. We've gone over and over again with it. And
So
I
it
need to
was
say
Chinese.
that multiple independent fact checkers, including the Washington Examiner, which we know the Washington Examiner is not a left-leaning organization, that they have fact-checked that and proven otherwise than the allegations we are hearing. And so with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Yeah, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle keep referring to, quote, extraordinary cooperation with the Justice Department, and then just raise questions about who was at a particular interview or not. I think that particular questioning was just Chairman Jordan, given whatever was going on that day. I think it was a circumstance in which he was the only one that was available on the time. But in any event, we're privy to what was discussed. And the fact is the Justice Department has been essentially unilaterally limiting the scope of what the department witnesses can testify about. That's been happening over and over and over again. When you look at the transcripts and when you look at the conversations, you know what's happening. When the witnesses come in and they're being told, hey, on this set of questions, answer, this is an ongoing investigation. That's what's actually happening. And that's, frankly, an ongoing problem that we're having to deal with. And one of the reasons that's behind the need for an inquiry is to be able to go seek the truth where it actually may lead. And if there's no there there, then I feel like my colleagues protest a little much, given what we now know in terms of the amount of money that has been flowing into the Biden family, which is concerning on its face. The extent to which we now have an indictment of the president's son concerning on its face. The extent to which we have witness testimony that has come in before under oath, talking about the extent to which the president himself was present and privy to the information involving Hunter. This is concerning on its face. The fact is, right now we have curtailment of investigative steps to protect the Bidens. Why prosecutors prohibit investigators from referencing, to dad and the big guy in witness interviews. Anytime any questioning goes down that line, the DOJ has been telling people, nope, stop. You say this is nothing but ongoing investigation. The fact that we had 84,000, whatever the number is, of all of the email correspondence with the pseudonyms, and we've gotten 14 of them on its face. This body deserves to get more information. I think this is very clear. The average American watching this would agree. I'm perfectly happy to stand behind this. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, I just want to say $2 billion from the Saudi government to Jared Kushner, and not a word. Oh, that's just normal. I mean, come on, give me a break. Again, a little transparency, I think, would be welcome here. And quite frankly, this notion that we should trust the chairs of these respective committees to tell us all that they know, when we know that they've been misrepresenting publicly what has been said privately. We'd like to see the transcripts. We'd like a little openness. That's all. The American people deserve that. The way this resolution is written, when it's all said and done with, no matter what happens, the American people may get nothing. may not get any report at the end of this process. So again, $2 billion from the Saudi government, come on, and no questions. That's just perfectly normal. Give me a break. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion and debate on the amendment? Hearing none. The questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for recorded votes.
Recorded vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Massey. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I have another amendment, amendment number 8.
Gentleman's recognized. Oh, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 8 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. McGovern. Page 14, line 18, strike House Resolution 917 and insert House Resolution 917 as amended by the amendment specified in Section 7 of this resolution. Add at the end the following. Section 7, Amendment to House Resolution 917. The amendment to House Resolution 917 referred to in Section 6 of this resolution is as follows. Page 4, line 12, insert before the semicolon the following. Except with respect to a grand jury matter related to a criminal prosecution pending on the date of adoption of this resolution, a grand jury matter related to a prosecution arising from the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021, or a grand jury matter in a case with respect to which former President Donald Trump is a defendant.
Gentleman is recognized to discuss his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, from the beginning of this Congress, extreme MAGA Republicans have made it clear that they're willing to abuse the important constitutional power of impeachment for their own political goals. Chief among those goals, whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. The extreme MAGA architects of this impeachment have sought to intervene, disrupt, and undermine the numerous ongoing criminal prosecutions of Donald Trump himself, along with his misguided followers who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. The extreme MAGA architects of this impeachment have made statements and written letters harassing the Georgia and New York prosecutors pursuing justice against Donald Trump in their states. The extreme MAGA architects of this impeachment have vowed to defund the special counsel Jack Smith's office just for doing his job of pursuing justice without fear or favor. Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who recently claimed credit for goading former Speaker Kevin McCarthy into launching this inquiry, and other extreme MAGA Republicans routinely refer to the criminals imprisoned for committing crimes on January 6th as hostages and patriots and promise retribution against the DOJ for their prosecutions. This resolution clears
They
the
absolutely
path
are.
for these same extreme MAGA Trump protectors to seek and obtain law enforcement sensitive grand jury secret information at the heart of ongoing criminal prosecutions. Despite months of investigation, extreme MAGA Republicans cannot define any alleged high crimes or misdemeanors as the basis for this inquiry. It is not surprising then that this resolution contains no limit on the scope
Well,
of the
you
inquiry.
have an
As a
inquiry, you
result, there is nothing
fucktard.
here to constrain a motivated committee chair from demanding, accessing, and spoiling critical information at the heart of ongoing criminal prosecutions of Donald Trump or January 6th defendants. I hope my Republican colleagues can agree that any legitimate inquiry concerning the conduct of the current president should have absolutely nothing to do with the pending cases against Donald Trump or the
It's
other
just only
individual
okay to
criminals
impeach if
responsible
it's the
for the
extreme
insurrection
Obama-loving
against the Capitol on
Democrats that do
January
it.
6th. If so, I expect that they will join me in voting for this amendment to protect the integrity of those ongoing prosecutions and prevent inappropriate interference. If they reject this amendment, it will be because they know this impeachment inquiry is more about protecting Donald Trump from justice and accountability than anything else. And I would urge a unanimous vote on my amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none. The questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for recorded vote.
Recorded vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mr. Massey.
No.
Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy.
No.
Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
Noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I have an amendment.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 9 to House Resolution 918, offered by Mr. Neguse. Before the resolve clause, insert the following. Whereas by December 11th, in the first session, the 117th Congress had enacted 71 bills. The 116th Congress, under divided government, had enacted 78 bills, and the 118th Congress had enacted just 22 bills. And whereas, as of December 6, 2023, the House of Representatives has spent 26 days electing 2 speakers of the House. Now, therefore, be it.
Gentleman is recognized on this amendment.
I think,
The
Mr.
shit
Chairman,
cares.
this amendment is very simple, very straightforward, and it essentially recounts the inadequacies of this legislative session of Congress under Republican control for the better part of the last 12 months. The American people understand that the impeachment that Republicans have decided to pursue is a waste of time and is distorted from the priorities that they would like to see us as elected leaders address. They want to see us working on lowering costs, on growing the middle class, on building safer communities, on finding common ground. And it's
No, we
unfortunate
actually don't. We're okay with
that
you
as they look at the full
spending
spectrum
time on
of the
this
last
so you
11
can't
months
fuck
under
anything else
Republican
up.
control, they will find nothing of the sort. The data speaks for itself. This will go down as the least productive Congress since 1933.
Perfect.
Think about that. The least productive Congress since the Great Depression. That is what Republicans have brought the country in the form of their majority. And by the way, you go back almost 100 years, 90 years, plenty of those years, Republicans had a majority, Democrats had a majority. Sometimes it was divided government. Sometimes one party had a majority in every branch. But none of those years ultimately included a Congress as unproductive as this one. We have 48 hours left in terms of legislative work. Republicans obviously set the schedule. They set the calendar. They have informed the House and the country that the legislative week will end Thursday. Everyone will go home for holiday break. The year will end. No permanent farm bill reauthorization. No permanent FAA reauthorization. No action on critical national security considerations that the president has implored us as a Congress to take up. No action on funding government. When we return back in January, or in January, I should say, we'll face another set of dueling deadlines that Republicans have imposed to try to find a way to fund the government after 2 efforts in just the last 4 months by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to shut the government down. It is hard for me, and I think awfully hard for the American people, to identify a single thing of substance that the Republican majority has accomplished in these last 11 months, beyond expelling one of their own members. And of course, ejecting their former speaker. And with all of that backdrop in mind, House Republicans have decided that the most important priority for the United States Congress to pursue before they go home for vacation is to start a baseless impeachment inquiry against the President of the United States. I think that's a sad state of affairs. I don't think it's reflective of the view of most Americans who, as I said, would just like to see all of us finding ways to find common ground and address the challenges of our time that are very pressing. It's deeply unfortunate. I think my colleagues know that, but they are committed to pursuing this course all the same. And so my hope is that we can at least provide some factual context for the House to consider with respect to the whereas clauses that we're adding, so that every member can be fully apprised as to the nature of this Congress. And with that,
Would the gentleman yield?
sure, happy to yield.
I had a mentor who admonished me once to never confuse activity with progress. And I'm not sure that all of these bills constitute progress. I probably voted against most of them, given my penchant for voting no. How many of these were post office renamings?
Yeah.
Oh, he's jittery as shit.
And I have no doubt, given your penchant for voting no, that you would disapprove and disagree with the work of much of the prior Congresses, Republican and Democrat. I'm not accusing you, of course, in a pejorative sense. What I would say is that even under your constrained view of government, the statistics are sobering. I think it's tough to argue that this Congress has been a productive one. 22 bills 22 bills enacted since the start of this year. 22. I mean, by the way,
We could, we-
by the way, Representative Massey, I'll give you a chance, opportunity. There are plenty. I've had many conversations with some of your colleagues, Republican colleagues on your side of the aisle, who have bills that are thoughtful, addressing some of the challenges that we face, that are bipartisan in nature. They can't get them to the floor. They can't convince their leadership to allow them to come before this committee. So when I say that this is the least productive Congress in the history of
Jesus
modern
Christ,
history
dude,
of the
sit
Great
still.
Depression,
Like, just sit
I'm not so
still.
sure that I would find much disagreement amongst some members of your own caucus, certainly not amongst the American people. Again, I understand the esoteric argument you're making with respect to, some bills being less meaningful than others. That might be an argument to make when there's at least some numerical comparison to be made. In this case, the numbers speak for themselves. This Congress isn't doing anything. Anything. Put aside the numbers. I mean, I think you'd agree with me that it's probably a good idea that we have a permanent farm bill extension, right? I mean, you don't believe that we should just forget about a permanent 5-year reauthorization for the farm bill and reauthorization for the FAA and funding the government and all these core. Of course,
Chairman Yield. Yeah, I'd like to see the farm bill come to the floor. There's legislation in there that I've introduced that would like to see that become law. Ledger Fernandez is a co-sponsor of some of those changes that we need. My only
let's
point,
do that instead of
yeah,
impeachment.
my only point was in a metric that includes the naming of post offices, and we haven't named a lot of post offices this Congress. I got to admit, we're kind of slacking on that regard. None since the new speaker hasn't even named a post office, as far as I can tell. But I just think we shouldn't confuse activity with progress. And my constituents don't care about the number of bills we pass; they care about the quality of bills.
Well, I would say, well, I have
yield
great
back.
respect for my colleague. I understand the argument he's making. I would say I think your constituents in Kentucky, as well as my constituents in Colorado, do care about the farm bill being reauthorized. They care about the FAA bill. They care about the funding of government. And irrespective of where one lands on the numerical comparisons, and again, I think it is evident that the reality is this Congress, that many of the bills in prior Congresses that are included in that total were in fact substantive, not just post office naming bills. But I'll take the gentleman's point and would just suggest that in the last 11 months, again, I can't point to a single accomplishment that the Republican majority has pursued. And prioritization matters, right? I mean, ultimately the Republican leadership, speaker, committee chairs, they decide what the House is going to consider and what it's not going to consider. And the fact that all of those important priorities that I just mentioned, which I think the American people care deeply about, can't get to the floor. And meanwhile, the last vote or second to last vote we take before a holiday break will be the initiation of an impeachment inquiry. I think to me, it encapsulates the entire approach that the Republican conference has taken this Congress. And that's all I'm just suggesting to you that I think most of the folks back in Kentucky, certainly folks back in Colorado, Fort Collins and in Grand County and elsewhere in my district, I go home, they're asking me about lower costs. They're asking me about inflation. They're asking me about how do we support our schools? How do we?
Yeah, more
support
than
public
half their
safety? How do we
bills are
build safer
just
communities?
naming post
They're not asking me
offices.
about impeachment inquiries.
Would the gentleman yield just for one more
Sure.
small fine point? This includes bills that were conferenced with the Senate or also passed the Senate and signed into law.
Correct. Yes, correct.
So there is, we have passed legislation that's sitting in the Senate that hasn't passed. So while it's true that there's a Republican speaker and we're on our second one, this Congress in the House, there's a Democrat leader in the Senate, and you have to find common ground between the two.
Well, and this is the fascinating part, Mr. Massey, because that would be a compelling argument.
Well, I think
for
it
the
still is.
But for the fact that in the 116th Congress, Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, Donald Trump was President of the United States, Mitch McConnell was the Senate Republican Majority Leader, and somehow we found a way to get 78 bills across the finish line in that Congress. Divided government notwithstanding, we found common ground. We charted a path forward. I suggest to you the problem in this instance, it's not a function of House Democrats or Senate Republicans or the White House. It is exclusively a function of the House Republican Conference that has made clear, as you said, that they do not value quantity with respect to legislation that we're pursuing, and that they don't put a premium on actually getting bills signed into law that might make a difference in the American people's lives. And that's your preference, stated preference. You're entitled to that preference, different than mine, but it has consequences.
Well, included in this statistic is the CARES Act, which has been, that was the $2 trillion that Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, and Nancy Pelosi passed.
And almost your entire conference voted for, yes.
Yes, and I was against it because I said it would
I
cause
understand.
inflation I said it would cause inflation and shortages and a lot of long-term maleffects to the economy, and here we are. So again, I would just, and I'll leave it at this. I don't think we should conflate activity with progress.
All right.
And some people, because a lot of these bills, besides naming post offices, were spending bills, some of my constituents would rather they hadn't passed.
Sure. Well, I will just simply say, and then I'm going to yield to the ranking member, that to the extent that the American people are interested in putting these accomplishments side by side, in the same span, the same period of time that Republicans have had a majority, when Democrats had a majority, we passed the Chips and Science Act to onshore domestic manufacturing in Kentucky, in Colorado, in Ohio, across the heartland. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, as you well know, to decrease healthcare costs. We passed a bipartisan infrastructure law that is expanding broadband deployment across both of our respective states. I understand the gentleman voted against most of those bills, all of those bills, but I would just suggest those measures reflected, they comported with what the American people would like to see us doing, which is solving problems. And this is far from it. And I'll yield the right.
No, I'm glad the gentleman mentioned the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Most of my Republican colleagues voted against it. And just in case you forget what that bill is, that's the bill that even though you voted against, you do press conferences and ribbon cuttings every time some of that money goes to an infrastructure project in your respective districts. But the sad part about what is happening here, and the gentleman mentioned it, is that this Congress has become a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. I mean, we spend weeks trying to figure out a Speaker of the House after the previous Speaker of the House was ousted. You know, I mean, I mean, the infighting on the Republican side was so intense that it was unclear whether we'd ever get a Speaker of the House. I mean, every time someone got mentioned, they would be shot down. I do think the American people want us to figure out ways to pass legislation that will help them. The gentleman mentioned the Farm Bill. Not only that's a bill that not only impacts our farmers and is important for our economy, but it also deals with issues of nutrition and food insecurity, which unfortunately remains a big problem in this country. They want us to come together and figure this out. You know, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. But in this Congress, even when you agree on something, a small group on the far right gets to veto it. And so there are a lot of things that we could do in a bipartisan way that unfortunately never see the light of day. And we spend our time doing this kind of stuff. You know, oh, let's launch an impeachment inquiry against Joe Biden. We don't really have any evidence. There's no smoke. There's nothing. But you know what? Hey, you know, it's red meat for our base, and the fundraising emails can go out, and Donald Trump wants it. We'll just do whatever he wants, and he'll be happy. And I'm just saying that I think people are surprised and disappointed that that this is a Congress that is not producing much. And again, I get that the gentleman votes usually against almost everything, and that's fine. But for the vast majority of people in this country, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, they want to see us function. I mean, and you know, and we should be talking right now about how to avoid a government shutdown in January or February. To the best of my knowledge, we're not even having any preliminary conversations. But we have time for this. We don't have time to make sure we keep the lights on, but we have time for this. It is just so frustrating. And to the gentleman's point, that we are going to spend time, not only in this committee, but tomorrow on the floor debating this and not debating a supplemental package, or not figuring out how to keep the government running, or not doing anything of like that matters to anybody. But we're doing this because it matters to one person, Donald Trump. I mean, I think is really a sad commentary on where we are. I regret to say. I yield back to the gentleman.
And yield to the gentlewoman from New Mexico.
Thank you very much. And I think that what this discussion that we're having here talks about is the difference between governing and political exercise. And what we have pointed out through the bills that we passed and the accomplishments of investing in infrastructure, investing in rural America like we have not invested in since the New Deal, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Chips and Science Act, the American Rescue Plan, or investments in rural America like we have not seen since the New Deal. And that is about governing. And that is what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about not just passing the Farm Bill, which has expired and needed a safe, you know, we're going to have to push it to next year, but we won't let it expire, but we should have worked on it. We should have gotten our legislation in there and passed. It's also, we couldn't pass the agricultural appropriations bill. We couldn't pass the things that we're supposed to do about governing. And Democrats know how to govern. And that's what we showed last Congress. We governed on behalf of the people we represent. And what we have done this year is indeed political exercise. And so, you know, my colleague from Pennsylvania, Representative Washington, says that impeachment is a political exercise. That somehow Democrats are to blame for this impeachment because we impeached President Trump. Once again, doesn't this committee remember what happened on January 6th I suggest again that anybody who wants to vote for this impeachment inquiry, ask the law enforcement officers who were battered and beaten protecting the House floor. Ask them what that impeachment was about. It wasn't a political exercise. What happened on January 6th was a violent attack on our democracy, and impeachment should not be normalized. It should not be a political exercise. It should be reserved for something like that where the evidence was overwhelming. And even if it is a political exercise, I suggest to my colleagues that the politics are not on your side. The public does not support this inquiry. According to a Morning Consult survey from earlier this month, the number of Americans who believe Congress should start these impeachment proceedings has decreased to around 40%. That's compared to Trump's January 6th impeachment trial, which had a majority of Americans supporting it. We know, we've had polls and we've looked at it, that impeachment is not a top priority of your constituents. The Congressional Integrity Project commissioned polling and asked, what are the pollings? And they found that 74% of Americans, including 68% of independents, in those districts that your members represent, that Biden won, in those districts, the people, your constituents, believe that we should focus on issues like the economy, inflation, crime, over what we're doing here. 90% of voters, including 93% of independents, want Congress to stop playing partisan games and work to address these issues. You know, I mean, 3 in 5 Americans supported the impeachment of Donald Trump for what happened. And that was after a month of evidence, because we didn't need to collect a lot of evidence because we had lived through it. You all, your committees have been
Devel,
collecting
I'm
evidence for
extreme,
11 months.
extreme,
And leaking it out to the
extreme
public, as
MAGA.
we've described earlier. And you still cannot get the public supporting the inquiry that you are about to undertake. And I would suggest that if you are concerned that this is a political exercise, that you look and ask yourselves, what do the American people want? And they don't want this. And this is so different than the impeachment that we felt compelled to do and that Republicans supported us. Remember, you're going to proceed on this on a purely partisan effort. Republicans in the House and in the Senate voted to impeach.
I can't do it well, but
for January 6th.
you know what I
That
mean
I'm
by
gonna
it.
give back to my colleague.
And I thank the gentlewoman, and I would yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I've been here since late in 2018, just over 5 years. And it has been my misfortune to be here for 2 impeachments of the President of the United States. But what is markedly different about those 2 impeachments is the amount of study we engaged in, constitutional study, rereading the Federalist Papers, debating about whether the trauma of an impeachment to the country was required by the evidence we had in front of us. The discussion was about how the evidence we had in front of us, whether the evidence of trying to extort an ally who, as we speak, is begging for us to provide aid, whether that evidence or the evidence of what happened on January 6th, both of them demanded action because we had a rogue president who was undermining our constitutional order. That's not the conversation we're having here today. The conversation we're having here today is, well, we've been through tens of thousands of pages of things. We've interviewed people, we've deposed people. We haven't found anything, so we need to crank it up a notch so we can continue to keep fishing around and looking for something. That's not an impeachment basis. And it's really, really disturbing to see the depths to which this House has sunk with this inquiry. We said at the outset, this is a waste of time. It's a political stunt. It's a MAGA kangaroo court. And I'm just really disappointed that so many of our colleagues are willing to sleepwalk through this entity and don't have the guts to stand up to it. I yield back.
I would simply say, Mr. Chairman, I share the sentiments of Ms. Scanlon and Ms. Ledger Fernandez. I've served in Congress since 2018. Have served on the Judiciary Committee throughout the duration of my tenure in the Congress. I believe I'm the only member of this committee who has served as a House prosecutor during the second impeachment trial of President Trump, and spent many a day preparing for that trial and making the case to our colleagues in the upper chamber. I know a thing or two about impeachment and about the constitutional standards, the exacting nature of that standard. I was with many of you in the House chamber on the second floor on January 6th.
Vagina.
I remember it well. I remember the outrage that so many of us felt on both sides of the aisle at what President Trump had done in inciting a mob to come and disrupt and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. He was impeached for that on a bipartisan basis with good cause. And he has been singularly focused ever since on exacting retribution. He's made that clear. He posts about it often on social media. It's been reported that he's communicated directly to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle what he's communicated to the public, which is that he demands that House Republicans exact this political revenge and impeach President Biden. And that's why our colleagues are pursuing this step, notwithstanding the damage it'll do to the country, and notwithstanding the way in which it will divert this Congress from being able to prioritize the issues that ultimately matter to the American people. And perhaps that's the best place to close. There's a quote I'll read. I thought it summarized this well. Quote, while they fixate on overturning a presidential election, Americans continue to face high prices at the drugstore, roads and bridges that are falling apart, and a broken immigration system. Sorry, while House Democrats fixate on overturning a presidential election, Americans continue to face high prices at the drugstore, roads and bridges that are falling apart, and a broken immigration system. We need to end this political theater and get back to work for the American people, end quote. That's a quote from my friend, Mr. Eschenthaler, when he voted against the impeachment inquiry resolution in November, end of October of 2019, 4 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I would ask him to heed his own words and perhaps maybe our colleagues to do the same. Let's get back to work on behalf of the American people. Let's work on addressing immigration and public safety, lowering costs. That's my request.
Sending more money to Ukraine.
Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My friend from Colorado made a perfect
Israel.
dovetail into my comments because I believe I've been misquoted twice now. Earlier in the hearing, I said explicitly that the standard of impeachment has been lowered by the Democrats to the point now where it's in essence a political exercise. This isn't a political exercise. We were simply going to have an inquiry, a vote on an inquiry to start the process in order to, and again, I've said it ad nauseum, the Biden administration is refusing to comply. Their own lawyers have said we need to have a vote on the inquiry, and that's what we're doing. But again, during the first impeachment of Trump, I was on the committee with my friend from Colorado and Judiciary, and I said, if we move forward with this impeachment, we are in essence making this a political exercise. And I said then, if you have a president and a House of Representative of two different political parties, it's now going to be just expected by whatever base you have, whether it's Democrat or Republican, that you're going to have an impeachment. And I reiterated those same comments on impeachment number 2 when I sat in the same exact chair that my friend is sitting in from Colorado right now. From there, I said the same exact words. So yeah, I spoke out against impeachment twice because I felt the standard had not been met. And I would still reiterate this, that there wasn't enough evidence to go forward. There weren't the high crimes and misdemeanors. Instead, the Democrats continue to push it forward. And now we have a situation where impeachment, the standard of impeachment has been lowered to such a degree that, again, it's merely at this point a political exercise. Not that this is a political exercise, but the bar has been lowered. And if you don't believe me, let's just go back and look historically. In 2017, December 6, 2017, you had H-Res 646. 58 Democrats voted to advance an article of impeachment for the high crime or misdemeanor of, wait for this one, disrespecting the NFL league anthem protest and calling a member of Congress wacky. That was a high crime and misdemeanor back in December of 2017. Then January of 2018, January 19, 2018, H-Res 705. 66 Democrats voted to advance impeachment for the high crime or misdemeanor of President Trump's, wait for it, rhetoric. You try to impeach him just for rhetoric. I mean, that is absolutely laughable. It didn't stop there. July 17th, 2019, H-Res 498. 95 Democrats voted to advance impeachment for the high
That's
crime
it.
or misdemeanor of,
And yep,
this is another really good
only
one,
one that's important.
insulting the squad. I mean, it's absolutely laughable. So when I say that the Democrats have reduced the standard of impeachment to a point where it's just absolutely absurd, you have. And now we're just playing by the same rules that you set for us in the last two, I'm sorry, in the 116th Congress. But with that, I would yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Where? Oh, I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to note for the record that according to this amendment, the House spent 26 days electing 2 speakers. I don't dispute we spent that much time, but we were thrown into that situation not by Republicans, but by 8 Republicans and 208 Democrats that voted to vacate the chair. So the fact that we had to spend extra time dealing with our own speaker election We wouldn't have had to do that were it not for 208 Democrats voting with 8 Republicans to make that happen. I'd also like to note, there's been lots of talk about what we've not done. Just yesterday, we passed the Lower Cost, More Transparency Act, reducing healthcare costs for American families. That was a bipartisan effort that passed the House last night on suspension by wide margins. So despite us needing to do this work procedurally, we are still accomplishing things on behalf of the American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion? The gentlelady from,
Yield to you, then you yield to me.
We're just. we just
gentlelady
wanna
from
know.
New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to note that, Mr. Washington, I think there is a difference between what passes the House and what leadership supports. And so the instances you've described, that's not what passed the House. That is not what leadership supported, because if they had, then it would have been supported. What we're talking about is the January 6th impeachment. That is the standard for which we think you should say that is the standard. When you say we've lowered the standards, well, the standard should be something as grievous as that. Something as
Okay, that was all bullshit and all the
foreign government.
feds.
Those are
So
big things. Little things like that, if we
it's a
get 50
shitty
some
standard.
people upset about something or another, 60 some about something else. That is not what leadership is pursuing. Your leadership, as evidenced by the hearing today, as evidenced by the resolution, as evidenced by the vote that will be taken on a purely partisan basis tomorrow, is supporting impeachment inquiry where there is nothing there. And I think it's also very insulting. Look, I was struck by something I read by the chair, Chair Comer, who, as I said, he's appeared before us. I respect him. But with regards to the blinding, there's going to become like the vengeance is almost like blinding people to the need to govern, blinding them to what they're saying. Where when he was talking about impeachment, he actually described that in talking to the people who listen to CNN, who watch CNN, and need to hear about impeachment, that they were, quote, a low IQ audience. We should not lower expectations. We should not expect that Americans cannot understand the importance of what we're doing here today, the importance of what we're doing, what it means, and what the frameworks we're talking about, which is what our only impeachment manager on this committee talked about, how serious this action is and how serious we should take it. And with that, I yield to our ranking member.
No, I just want to, for the record, the gentlelady from Indiana, I just want to make clear, please don't blame Republican dysfunction on Democrats. It's not our fault it took 15 votes to elect your first speaker. It's not our fault that it took 2 weeks after your first speaker was ousted to find another speaker. I mean, the idea that we should vote for a Republican Speaker of the House who doesn't share our values, we voted for Hakeem Jeffries. We voted our values, but that it's our fault. You changed the rules to make it possible for any member on your side to oust a sitting speaker. You did that. So you changed the rules to make this dysfunction easier. And so please don't blame that on us. Thank you. I yield back.
Yield to gentleman from Colorado.
I think the gentlewoman, and I would just simply say, I think the gentlewoman made a salient point, which is the argument Mr. Reschenthaler was making, and the vast majority of us were not here for those votes that he referenced, but essentially motions to table impeachment resolutions that have been introduced by various different Democrats when Democrats had the minority, and essentially citing that there were various groups who voted in favor of, or rather who voted to oppose the motion to table, that is somehow equivalent to the impeachment inquiry vote that the Republican majority will insist on tomorrow. I just don't think it's a good faith argument in my view. And I think where I struggle among many of the other objections that we've made today around due process and the misplaced priorities that House Republicans are pursuing, but to the extent you want to talk about constitutional standards and high crimes and misdemeanors, it's unclear to me. I think it's unclear to the vast majority of the American people what high crime and misdemeanor you're investigating. I don't know if you have an answer in that regard. I don't.
All right. Well, first, thank you for yielding. I appreciate it. First off, I said nothing about the motion to vacate. That was a number. That was another one of my colleagues. I've been simply focused on
So
impeachment.
I'm talking about the motion
but-
to tables. I wasn't referencing the motion to vacate. I'm talking
Okay,
about
I'm
the
sorry.
votes that you
Okay.
referenced in 2017 and
Right.
2018,
Right.
which neither you and I were here for, as you know, on resolutions that have been introduced by different members of Congress, impeachment resolutions that Democrats introduced when they were in the minority, and those resolutions were tabled I believe the votes that you're referencing were the motion to table vote totals. And so, yes, I understand your argument, but I'm saying that's clearly not equivalent to the impeachment inquiry that you all intend to initiate tomorrow against President Biden. But anyway, to the core, I think the question I'm asking you is,
Okay, go ahead.
what is the specific constitutional crime that you're investigating?
Well, we're having an inquiry, so we can do an investigation. It can
Okay.
all the production of witnesses.
And what is the crime you're investigating?
And documents. High crimes, misdemeanors, and bribery.
What
It's
high
in the
crime and
Constitution.
misdemeanor are you investigating?
Look, I will, once I get time, I will explain what we're looking at, and I will make the equivalency
No, I'm just
of
asking you
the
for
last
the,
impeachment.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say, Mr. Reschenthaler, and again, I say this because I served as a prosecutor during the last impeachment of former President Trump. There was a specific high crime that he was impeached for on a bipartisan basis. 13 Republicans agreed. During 2019, when President Trump was impeached, there were two very specific offenses that he was impeached for. And I can't get an answer. I don't think members of the Oversight Committee could get an answer, or the Ways and Means Committee, or the Judiciary Committee. I don't think there is an answer. There's not, and of course, it's unsurprising because according to even Fox News correspondents, House Republicans have been unable to make any kind of connection to a constitutional high crime and misdemeanor and President Biden. So I would say this, to make the argument that there is some similarity between, and I don't know if this is what you're suggesting, I hope it's not, between the various facts that you focused and zeroed in on with respect to President Biden and President Trump's conduct on January 6th. It's very clear to me, the American people would reject that argument outright. And by the way, I will say, because Ms. Ledger-Fernandez made this argument, one of the reasons that I respect Mr. Roy, and him and I have deep disagreements, and I understand that he opposed both of the prior impeachments against President Trump. But it's an important clarification because before I quote you, I want to make sure that it's accurate. All that being said, you attested on the House floor in the days after January 6th that President Trump had engaged in impeachable conduct. That's the phrase you used, that he, quote, he deserves universal condemnation for what was clearly, in my opinion, impeachable conduct. I understand you opposed, obviously, the resolution was ultimately approved for different reasons. You're not going to hear any member on our side of the aisle describing President Biden's actions in that way because there is no impeachable conduct.
No, because you guys stick together.
And
Even
so,
if it was going straight
very
to hell,
distinct-
you would still
very
stick
deep
together on the
contrast
bus.
between the impeachment against President Trump, former President Trump, for inciting that insurrection on January 6th.
Because it's
and
a fucking
the
cult on the other
impeachment
side.
process that you all decided to initiate against President Biden today. And I would yield back to the gentleman.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Texas. is
one thing,
recognized.
and I'm not going to dwell on it in the interest of time. I do want to note there's significant indication has been referenced by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that there's no backing by the American people. AP poll, 68% of United States adults believe that President Biden is engaged in illegal or unethical, but not illegal conduct. 35% say legal, 33% say unethical, but not illegal. That's all while we're going through the hearings and looking at the conduct that we see before us. So there is a significant amount, and not just Republicans, significant amount of independents, some Democrats, who believe that the president, as vice president, as private citizen, has engaged in conduct that is deserving of looking into it. To answer the gentleman's question, the question before us, I think, is whether President Biden used his office for his personal gain or his family's gain, whether there was influence peddling involved, whether there was international dollars flowing to the president as vice president or as private citizen after leaving the office of the vice presidency. And we have an obligation to follow those dollars. That's point one. Point two is whether or not the vice president then lied about said behavior, repeatedly saying, I never talked business with anybody with respect to his son's business dealings. We have ample evidence on the record indicating that there was in fact presence by the president when he was the vice president at business dealings of Hunter and knew full well that that kind of behavior was ongoing. Thirdly, and importantly, is whether or not there's been rampant obstruction by virtue of what we've seen out of the Department of Justice with the orders going down to say that you're going to say that this is, under investigation, that you're not going to answer those questions. What exactly happened, by the way, with Weiss cutting the sweetheart deal? Suddenly the judge says, no, that's a bad deal. Suddenly then there's going to be actual real indictments that followed from that in September and then notably last week, following those dollars, looking to see what exactly happened. I've got double pages here of all of the ways in which the Department of Justice has breached standard protocol, allowing the statute of limitations, very quite likely purposely, allowing the statute of limitations to lapse on tax problems from 2014 to 2015, very specifically, because that was most likely to be tied to the time at which Vice President Biden was involved. There are numerous things I could go down the list of, but there are lots of things the American people want to know the truth about. We're going to continue to pursue the truth, and that's what this is about. I yield back.
Is there further discussion and debate in the amendment? Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
I'll be brief, and I'm going to yield some of my time to Guy, but, you know, for the Americans watching this, if you interviewed in Colorado and Pennsylvania, anywhere across the country, your top 10 concerns for the main hardworking taxpayer on the street, would they say Congress hadn't passed a good number of bills? Would they say the Speaker of the House, we're really worried about that? Would they say January 6th is a top concern? I would argue, I would wager a good bit of money, they would not. What would they say? And Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you mentioned good government, good governing. Would they say having a wide open border and letting 8 to 12 million illegals that are coming to New York City and all over the country, is that good governing? Would they say having the young Americans die because of an open fentanyl trade? Would they say that's good governing? Would they say leaving Americans in Afghanistan to die? Is that good governing? Would they say spending more money than we make is good governing? Would they say that buying oil from foreign countries instead of producing it here in America and the price that they're paying versus 4 years ago, is that good governing? Now, I would say those are the top concerns. And Ms. Scanlon, you mentioned, you know, where's the guts to I guess, stop what you perceive as Republicans? Where's the guts on your side? You've got a president, Joe Biden, who's cognitively gone. Why don't you get with his handlers, whoever it is? Now, you can argue if you think he's not cognitively gone, I would wager a good bit of money. You give him with 5 doctors, they would tell you the man's not there. Now, that's what America's concerned about. That's what America wants.
Would the
And if
gentleman
you-
yield?
Let me just finish. Those are the concerns. And I get the theater to try to divert this to the things you mentioned about the hearings, how you think. The real concerns affecting the pocketbooks of Americans, and you're going to see it. I hear it. I'm in that world of construction workers. And they're sick and tired of what this administration is doing to sell this country out. And they're going to let us, they will let their feelings known. Now, you can disagree with that, but, and I will yield just a few minutes. I want to get to Guy, but I yield back. I yield to you.
I do disagree vehemently with what you've said. Have you spent any time with Mr. Biden, with the president?
Good God.
Did you go?
no. Lord.
Good God, no. No, you've been watching a little too much Fox News.
Not Fox. Watch him on Fox if he'll go there. Watch him on the few. How many press conferences does he have? What can he get off teleprompter and read? You tell me.
I have spent hours with the president without teleprompters, and the level of his conversation is way above this committee right now.
Scanlon, he
I
doesn't know
yield
where
back.
he is. He doesn't know where he is. He walks unless he's directionally challenged. But anyway, I get the theater and I get the wordsmithing and all that. But quite frankly, it's an embarrassment what this country is going through caused by this administration under one man or his handlers, whoever it is. I yield to Mr. Guy.
I want to thank my friend from South Carolina. Look, there's been a lot of talk equating these impeachments. I'm very familiar with the last 2 impeachments. I was on Judiciary during the first one. And remember, the second one didn't go through committee. It went through the Rules Committee. I sat in Mr. Negus's chair during that. So very familiar with the facts of both the impeachments. The first impeachment, just taking one at a time, was over a quid pro quo. I still think the quid pro quo didn't take place, but I do know who did have a quid pro quo, and that's Joe Biden. And you don't have to take my word for it. We have him on tape, dead to rights, bragging about shutting off aid to Ukraine in order to get a prosecutor, who's actually probably the one guy in that government that wasn't corrupt, that guy going after Burisma, which his son sat on the board of Burisma. Quite amazing. So in a sense, President Trump, the first impeachment, got impeached for something that Joe Biden actually did, and then went on TV and bragged about it. So it's quite amazing he would open the door to that. But there is and again, we're just here to decide if there should be an inquiry to proceed with investigations, and again, to compel the production of documents and the testimony of witnesses. But I'm looking at the facts here. I mean, I've got sheets and sheets of evidence here. The House Oversight Committee has uncovered that Owasco, which is Hunter Biden's shell company, that it received payments from Communist China on at least 3 occasions, made direct payments and then made direct payments to Joe Biden in 2018. The Oversight Committee has also found that Joe Biden received about $250,000 in direct payments from his family members who were making this money through their corrupt influencing peddling schemes. Like, we know he got that money, and I'm sorry, that wasn't money to repay a car. That was $250,000 that went to Joe Biden. You also have $40,000 in laundered money from Communist China. The Oversight Committee also found tens of millions of dollars from foreign adversaries funneled to the Biden family through corrupt influence peddling schemes. You have Devin Archer testifying that on approximately 20 occasions, Joe Biden called in or was part of the speakerphone conversations during Hunter Biden's business meetings. I mean, this is just what's been uncovered so far. And this is without, again, the impeachment inquiry going forward. So I am convinced that if we move forward with the impeachment inquiry, we'll be able to show that the Biden family and their business associates received roughly $24 million, if not more, from foreign sources over the course of roughly 5 years. We'll probably be able to show that President Biden was personally involved in his family's foreign business dealings and business arrangements with others, and that Biden has not been truthful about his family's foreign business entanglements. But that is just a minimum to move forward with the impeachment inquiry. So again, you can compare it to the first Trump impeachment all you want, because in a lot of ways, like I've said, you impeach Trump for what Biden actually did. But with that, I yield back to my friend from South Carolina.
Is there any further discussion or debate on the amendment? Gentlemen, ladies seek recognition?
Yes.
Ladies recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I think that what was interesting about this interchange were a couple of key things. One is that much of this conversation that we heard from Mr. Roy and Mr. Washington dealt with accusations that I entered into the record earlier about how these reports and these statements have actually shown to be contrary to the testimony and contrary to the records and documents. Like even the reporting from conservative news outlets have said these statements that we just heard.
There is no
from Mr.
conservative
Washington
news
or
outlet, you
Mr. Roy
bitch.
and others have actually been debunked, inconsistent with the record, directly contrary to what is in evidence. But they also point to the fact that some of these things happened in 2017 and 2018. That was before President Biden was in office. The Republicans' own witnesses have testified that in order to pursue an impeachment against a sitting president, you have to identify wrongdoing by the president during his presidency. I quote, "The relevant office for impeachment should remain the presidency, not the vice presidency of Joe Biden." That's Jonathan Turley. That is your expert saying that out, setting that out. So all of the stuff that you've talked about is not relevant to the impeachment of President Biden sitting as President Biden. And I think that that's what it is. We're hearing all these conspiracy theories that have been debunked that, the record shows is not true. And in fact, want to talk about what really happened in Ukraine, ranking member?
Yeah, no, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to constantly have to correct the record when the record is clear. The gentleman from Pennsylvania was wrong about the prosecutor in Ukraine. Vice President Biden's call for the resignation of Ukraine's corrupt prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin. The gentleman implies was somehow a secret effort to help Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company on whose board Hunter Biden served. The reality is that this was a falsehood put forward by another one of their star validators, Rudy Giuliani. In fact, Vice President Biden led a bipartisan international coalition calling on Ukraine to address corruption and reform the prosecutor general's office led by Shokin. So far from helping Burisma or its owner, firing Shokin increased the likelihood that Burisma would actually be investigated. But, my friends know this. I mean, this is not new information. They know what the truth is, but it doesn't matter. And so we know where all this is going, right? This is not an inquiry. I mean, my friends have decided they're going to do this no matter what. They're just going to have to try to cobble something together to actually bring an impeachment resolution to the floor. So that's what this is. This is not about the truth. This is not about facts. It's not about investigations. It's about pushing lies and distortions that have been corrected over and over and over again. And it again underlies our concern as to why my friends will not agree to an amendment saying that at least there has to be one public hearing or agree to a more open and transparent process. It is clear what's going on, but come on. I mean, resuscitating and regurgitating debunked stories and conspiracy theories. I mean, I think my colleagues are better than that. I yield back.
Thank you. And I think that, Mr. Chair, if I may enter into the record an Axios article titled, "Former Giuliani Associate Urges Comer to Abandon Biden Investigation."
Without objection.
Because this article describes how, the whole Burisma conspiracy theory started with Giuliani and his associates. And even the people who were involved in that are saying, abandon it. There was nothing there. And they wrote a letter to Comer explaining how there was nothing there. And I would quote from this saying, wrote a scorching letter claiming there is simply no merit for the investigation. With all due respect, Chairman Comer, the narrative you are seeking for the investigation has been proven false many times over by a wide array of respected sources. And this is something that's in the record, but when Chairman Comer is asked about it, he says, well, I don't know anything about that, but it's in the record, it's been sent to them. And so to constantly raise this issue of Ukraine, when those who first sort of said, well, we have we have some dirt on the vice president are now recanting and saying actually there was nothing there. That's why we want the public hearings, so that this kind of information can be seen, can be televised. We want it to be televised so the American public can judge for themselves. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
We want it televised so we
Is there
can
any
gaslight
further
the
discussion or
shit
debate
out of
on the
you.
amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to insert an article into the record by Jonathan Turley, since his name was just invoked, outlining his very strong belief that there is significant evidence for this committee and this body, I should say, to pursue with respect to an impeachment inquiry, where he walks through the many reasons why that would be important
Without objection.
with respect to the president, the vice, and in his role as vice president, and to answer the question that there is subsequent obstruction activities as president that would answer the question the gentleman put forward. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion or debate on the amendment? Hearing none. The questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
And the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? Hearing no requests for further amendments, I understand that my friend, our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Government, has some closing remarks. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say that I always appreciate the tone and the civility and respect in which you conduct this committee's proceedings. You're a good man. I just wish you
Oh,
voted.
fuck
with me
off.
more. But on this occasion, I have to note that I'm deeply disappointed that we were going to advance this shameful impeachment inquiry, which is only going to further divide this country. The things that my Republican colleagues say about President Biden are unhinged, untethered to reality, let alone substantiated by the evidence. Maybe these are the alternative facts that they always talk about. But it's been said already, but it bears repeating. This Republican majority is abusing and weaponizing the impeachment process to go after President Biden with not a shred of evidence that he did anything wrong. In fact, they're doing so despite a mountain of evidence that President Biden has always followed the law. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to speak directly to the people of America. You need to know that Republicans here in Washington still refuse to accept that Joe Biden won. They refuse to accept that in a free and fair election, President Biden got 7 million more votes and won the Electoral College. Now, they might be cute about it. They say things like Joe Biden is president, but they will not admit he won fair and square. Or maybe they don't care because they have contempt for you, the voters. They tried to stop the certification of the results to prevent Joe Biden from becoming president. Many of them still cheer on the insurrectionists. Many Republicans supported what the violent mob was trying to do. They wanted Trump to stay in power, the people's votes be damned. You know, I was one of the last people off the House floor on January 6, 2021. I took over for Speaker Pelosi after she was evacuated. I saw them pounding at the door in the speaker's lobby, trying to get at us, trying to kill us. Trump sent them here to this building to reverse the election results and certify that he won, even though he lost. And now the MAGA extremists who have control of this place want to finish the job. They still want to overturn the election. And what they couldn't accomplish on January 6th, they want to do with this extreme political stunt. They will do whatever it takes to win. And if we lose our democracy in the process, so be it. When it comes right down to it, this absurd impeachment inquiry has nothing to do with the integrity of President Biden. Not a thing. And it has everything to do with the lack of integrity in the Republican Party, which has been taken over by MAGA extremists. And no amount of evidence could convince them that Joe Biden did nothing wrong, because they aren't looking for the truth. They're looking for revenge. Their partisan impeachment stunt has no credibility, no legitimacy, and no integrity. And no vote could possibly make this baseless fishing
I'm not shocked,
legitimate.
buddy, but
With that, Mr. Chairman,
holy
I yield
shit.
back.
I understand my friend from Pennsylvania also has some closing remarks he would like to make. Gentleman's
I do.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going through a whole bunch of remarks from President Joe Biden calling President Trump an illegitimate president, but I'll set those aside for now. I'd like to enter into the record. I'd ask you unanimous consent to enter a written statement from Professor Turley from the United States House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability from the 28th of September 2023.
Without objection.
Thanks. I just think that this is so fitting just to read a brief portion of this because it explains exactly what we're here to do today. And Professor Turley said, and I quote, "My testimony also reflects the fact that I do believe that after months of investigation, the House has passed the threshold for an inquiry into whether President Joe Biden was directly involved or benefited from the corrupt practices of his son, Hunter, and others. I believe the record has developed to the point that the House needs to answer troubling questions surrounding the president." He goes on to say, "The record currently contains witness and written evidence that the president, one, has lied about key facts in these foreign dealings, two, was the focus of a multi-million-dollar influence peddling scheme, and three, may have benefited from his corruption through millions of dollars sent to his family, as well as more direct possible benefits. The president may be able to disprove or rebut these points, but they raise legitimate concerns over his role based on the accounts of key figures in the matter." So I would just like to point to the statement of Professor Turley, and thank you for putting in the record. I yield back.
Absolutely. Thank you. Before we proceed with the resolution, let me make a few closing remarks. First, I want to thank everybody on the panel on both sides of the aisle. Clearly, this is a difficult subject to talk about. Clearly, there are sharp differences of opinion, but I was very pleased with the demeanor that everybody went about making their points. I do want to refocus this. We've heard a great deal about President Trump. We've heard a great deal about President Biden. Purpose of the hearing is really simply about setting up a process. No one here should have a predetermined outcome in mind as to where they think we're going. You might have a predilection, but none of us know all the facts. And the reality is that is what we're seeking to do, is to empower committees to have the ability to fully investigate charges and come to independent conclusions and make a recommendation. At that point, whatever it is, if they decide to recommend anything at all, then the House will deal with it. So we covered a lot of ground, but some of it wasn't directly related to the process, and I think it's important to know that. The commitment I'll make to each of you on this committee is we'll continue to do our job in a fair and professional manner. You'll certainly continue to have your ability to make your points and your point of view known. I don't ever expect unanimity on the Rules Committee. It's not set up to achieve that. But again, I do want to conclude by reminding people there's a process that's underway. There's legitimate concerns and investigations. We're simply trying to give the investigators the tools they need to get to the truth, report back to the Congress, and then the Congress will be free to take whatever action, if any, it decides to take. So again, I thank all of you for your vigorous participation, but your professional demeanor and your civility and courtesy to one another. It genuinely is a privilege to serve in each and every one of you with you, even when we don't agree. And Mr. McGovern, like you, I wish you voted with me more often too. So we can go from there. With that, do we have any further amendments? Okay, hearing no request for further amendments, the question is now on favorably reporting House Resolution 918 to the House. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. For roll call. Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it. The resolution is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the resolution. And this concludes today's business. The committee stands adjourned.
So, boys and girls, that was the committee authorizing the impeachment inquiry of former Vice President Joseph Robinette Biden. Here we go again. So that was yesterday. Today they had debate on the floor because bill goes to committee, then it goes to the floor, and it's authorized. They had a vote on the floor today. They had nearly 9 hours of back and forth discussion, which probably 8 hours and 45 minutes was bullshit. So I'm going to start covering that tomorrow. I'm going to start at 11 a.m. and we'll cover as much of it as we can get through. I'll probably do about 4 hours, so 11 a.m. Eastern for about 4 hours until 3-ish, 3:30 maybe. And then we either do it Friday or Monday to catch up, depending. So, but I am all in. Looks like the impeachment. I still think we're not going to see actual impeachment hearings until after the new year. I haven't seen the schedule. Hearing schedule. Let's look if there's anything updated now that it's a little bit later. It's United States Senate. I want House. Committee schedule for the work week of December 11th to the 17th. That's this week. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow is the 14th. Senate Committee on Natural Resources. No, this is still the Senate. What the hell? There we go. There's the House schedule. So we need the 14th. So there's nothing at all scheduled for tomorrow, and then they are off until they don't have a January schedule in yet. They're off until at least the end of the year, after tomorrow. So I would guess pretty heavily that we won't get anything until after the first of the year. So gives me just enough time to catch up with all this pregame shit and kind of go from there. So I know, but I gotta do it. So let's be honest. I think the impeachment, in part, has been brought about because it was so bastardized by the Democrats with the 2 Trump impeachments that I don't think there was any legitimacy to, and were pretty obviously politically motivated. I think had you not done that, then we wouldn't be in this situation. Do I think Joe Biden's corrupt? Absolutely. Do I think we're going to see this with every political party, every president, until there's some kind of significant change with government by the people holding the government accountable? Yeah, I also think that's the case. Every single president, because naturally it usually flips in the midterms, it flips so the other party controls the House, and I think we're going to continue to see impeachment after impeachment after impeachment. It's just it's a worthless tool, and it's a sign that our Constitution and our government is breaking down, because it's been so bastardized at this point that it does little to hold up or mean anything. So I think we'll continue to see it over and over and over again, which is unfortunate, but there was several warnings given to the Democrats for their TDS against President Trump, and this was foreseeable. We knew this was going to happen. I don't think anybody, even remotely, is like, nope. I think everything's going to be fine and it will never happen again. We were all warning that it was certainly going to happen. I just realized that I have not paid attention to Rumble this entire time, and I apologize. I forgot it was over there, honestly. So, T-Rex, what conservative news outlet is she referring to? That's what I was saying. There is no fucking conservative news outlet anymore. DC Swamp Creature. Ever wonder how a career public servant Joe Biden and his community college teacher wife became so incredibly wealthy? Corruption. It's corruption. Jan 6 was a classic case of entrapment with paid crisis actors, Antifa, FBI agitators, and some Capitol police officers. Dirty Capitol police officers. Yeah, and I think most of it's FBI, and we're starting to learn that. So, I know it's so I wish they would integrate it with everything else. It would make it so easy. I mean, I feel even worse for Twitter. I don't even know how to fucking get over there and see anything that's going on. I know I'm streaming over there. I just don't. I don't know where it's at. I don't know where it's at. And speaking of, trending on Twitter is extreme MAGA Republicans. So, you know how this is being covered, even on Twitter. Hang on real quick. I'm trying to see if I can actually see it over here. I don't even see that I'm live over here anymore, though. What the hell? Maybe I'm not live. Is there a limit to how long you can be live on Twitter? Whatever. We'll figure it out at some point in my life. Anyways, so that's going to be it for tonight. Like I said, 11 a.m. Eastern. I will get started on the full House floor debate over the impeachment of former Vice President Joseph Robinette Biden. They're extreme TDS Democrats, or extreme demon rats, I like to call them, because they're rats, and if there's a Satan on earth, he's a Democrat. But just my opinion. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me. As always, please hit that thumbs up on the way out if you haven't already. My shitty poll that I misspelled half of. Impeached but not removed, 47% think that's what will happen. No, which was supposed to be not impeached, is 26%. 15% say impeached, and 10% say impeached and removed. So, yeah, that was a terrible poll. But anyways, I'll work on it. Yes, the resident in chief. So, all right, y'all. I hope everybody has an awesome night. I will catch you guys very soon. Take care and have a good night, y'all.